y'all, how are you doing this week? Good, I hope. Welcome to my video series that I've been calling Crime Dive. My name is Crystal Sky, and if you're anything like me, you can't help but be drawn to true crime cases. So that is what we're going to talk about today. If you are also drawn to true crime, and want to feel better about your own makeup skills, you should absolutely like, subscribe, and let's hang out together every other Tuesday where I will take a deep dive look into a true crime case while slapping on the old clown paint. Yes, we are back. I don't know if you guys saw my post on YouTube the other day, but Jeff had neglected to turn on the microphone, and I had done about half of this recording. And yeah, I'm like just about in my third trimester. I was already like hot and irritated. And yeah, it was just really, really annoying. But we got it done. We got her done. That's how dedicated I am to you. No, but seriously, yeah, that was really frustrating. So today, let's conclude our look into the Raven Abaroa case. I'm going to be showing you lots and lots of footage. I hope y'all have been enjoying that. I actually found an archive of the whole trial footage along with stories leading up to the trial. It's an archive by WRAL. It was the local Channel 5. Not sure what affiliate they're from, but they covered this case, and so there's lots of trial footage and stuff, so I'll link that down there below. I know some people love watching the trial footage. And yeah, there's just so much that I couldn't even like fit it all. So I will put it down there for y'all. And before we dive into part 2, if you remember in part 1, right, where we introduced to Janet Christensen, Raven Abaroa, how they met, how they got married, and then how Raven, was a womanizing piece of shit who also didn't know how to live within his means. And that caused some friction in the marriage, and they separated, but Janet was pregnant with their son. And then in late April 2005, Raven came home to discover Janet dead. We went over, the crime scene and all that, and a lot of Raven's fishy behavior, right? We went into how he had different versions of events of that happened that night. We showed the 911 call, and we went over how Janet's family started kind of suspecting him, right? And if you will remember, we ended last week with the new investigator taking over the case. It was the 5th investigator, Detective Charles Soule, and he started looking at Raven, all right, and how what he was saying, how he was sort of elusive with authorities, his different version of events and all that was kind of putting him on his radar, and he thought Raven should be considered a suspect. So that is where we'll pick up with Charles Soule continuing his investigation, continuing looking at Raven. And yeah, just wait until the end, guys. This is definitely one of those cases that is extremely frustrating, at least for me. You'll have to tell me what you guys think. All right, with that, let's begin part 2. So in the early evening of January 7th, 2010, following his suspicions about Raven, Soule wondered if he would, since Raven was a talker and had talked a lot when he did talk to investigators, and, he's kind of cocky, right, and kind of sure of himself, Detective Soule was wondering if maybe Raven would be open to talking to him. And Raven did indeed have a phone conversation with Soule on this day. But Raven, he recorded the phone call with Soule, which some people were saying whoa, that's weird, but I don't know, man. If I'm gonna have any type of conversation with a police investigator without a lawyer, I don't know, I think maybe recording it is a good idea. But anyway, Raven recorded this phone conversation that he had with Detective Soule, and afterwards, Raven continued recording and sort of talked to camera about how he felt about the conversation, and we'll get into that in a moment. Now, Soule said that throughout this conversation, he kind of put on the dumb Southern cop routine to sort of get Raven's defenses down, and kind of get him to open up more. And it worked like a charm. Raven ate that up. Throughout the conversation, Raven maintained his innocence and maintained that he had his alibi. Like, why is he a suspect? He's an alibi. He played the soccer game in Mooresville, and then he went to that convenience store and got Gatorade, and there's surveillance footage of him, so clearly he didn't kill his wife. Now, to Soul, remember, he'd been an investigator for a while, he thought this was kind of like an odd thing for Raven to say, specifically mentioning that, like, the convenience store would have surveillance footage of him. And like I said, after he had hung up with Detective Soul, Raven continued recording the recording that he had going, talking about how he felt about that conversation with Soul. And he said that he didn't feel too good about it. Raven said in the recording that he felt himself getting frustrated, but he didn't know why. He went on to say, quote, "I've got my work cut out for me. I need to win the lottery. This fight, you need money and you need power." And he said that if he won $3 million in the lottery, he would dedicate $2 million of his winnings to just fighting this. And then this is kind of weird. You'll see in the video that I'll show you. He kind of adds as an afterthought, "Oh yeah, and I'd spend like money to make Janet remembered at Southern Virginia University." And it's like said as like an afterthought. Like it was really weird.
All right, we'll see you later.
Bye.
I don't feel good about that. I feel myself getting frustrated. I'm not 100% sure why. You know, the more stuff I give them, the more stuff that gets leaked. I need to win the lottery. You know, if I were to win $3 million, I would dedicate $2 million to fighting this. 2/3 of my winnings, if you would. And to make Janet's name more recognized at Southern Virginia.
Soul said during the conversation when he asked Raven about the throwing knife, remember there was a knife missing from the crime scene. Raven's laptop and his knife were the only things missing. Apparently it was a throwing knife. And Soul said when he asked Raven about that, Raven got really, really touchy and like kind of defensive, asking him like, well, why does it matter? Why do you want to know about that? What the fuck? Like, what? Why do you think, you moron? Because they assume that's the murder weapon. Soul would end up saying of that conversation with Raven, quote, "Abaroa actually in the phone call said he thought it was a joke. He said, I can't believe you're investigating my wife's murder and you guys leave a knife in the crime scene. And then Raven comes upon it years later and decides to send it to us. That kind of concerned me." So you're probably thinking like, wait, what? What's going on? So after this recorded conversation, Raven would end up recording another video that he would end up sending to detectives. In this video, Raven is holding a knife. And he claims in the video that this knife had been overlooked at the crime scene, that it was among some of his packed stuff that he got from his house in Durham. His father and brother had packed up the house in Durham for him and sent him his stuff, and this knife was among those things. And yeah, in the video, he claims that the police neglected to collect this from the crime scene, which is why he had it. So like I said, Raven ended up sending this video and that knife to detectives.
This is a knife that has been in my possession since I got my stuff back from my brother and my dad moved out of my house for me after Janet passed away. It's a throwing knife, but I'm going to be mailing this to the detectives.
Meanwhile, Soul, he's working the case still, right? Going through stuff. And one of the things he was trying to ascertain, as most investigators do, right, with a murder, is he was trying to ascertain a motive. What could have been Raven's motive for killing Janet? And Soul went back to the life insurance policy. Remember, Janet had a $500,000 life insurance policy that Raven had taken out on her. And so he kind of went to that as a motive, a financial motive. So when Soul went through the Abaroa's financial history and Raven's individually, he saw some things that were a little concerning. First of all, at the time of Janet's death, the Abaroa's bank account was actually in the negative. Yeah, they did not have a lot of money. They were spending more than they were making, or at the very least, spending as much as they were making. Soul also discovered that at some point in time, this was before the embezzlement, I'm not sure of the exact time period, but at some point in time, one of the vehicles that Raven was financing had spontaneously combusted, caught fire, and had pretty much burnt to ash. Yeah. And Raven, of course, put in a claim for it, and he got paid out for it. And so looking at all this, plus that spontaneous combustion incident, Soul was wondering if, maybe finances and money wasn't the motive for Janet to kill his wife. For Raven to kill his wife. So on top of trying to ascertain a motive, remember we mentioned this in part 1, Soul, of course, went over all of the evidence that had been gathered. And one thing that stuck out to him was something in the crime scene photos. He said, quote, "I noticed the contact case on the counter with the top off of it, indicating to me that the likelihood that the contacts were probably not in there, which would be contrary to her going to bed, or as Raven said, in the bed going to sleep." So following this hunch, Soule then spoke to Janet's family and really close friends and asked them about Janet's contacts. And they all said that Janet was very conscientious, very religious about removing them right before she went to bed. Because, yeah, you're not supposed to sleep with contacts, right? Isn't that, like, super dangerous? Erica, one of Janet's sisters, was especially adamant that Janet, for sure, always removed her contacts. And she, again, was very adamant about it. She was like, look, I shared a bathroom with her growing up. I went to college with her. I shared many, hotel rooms with her. Believe me, I knew my sister's routine. And part of her bedtime routine, which never changed, was removing her contacts. And of course, right after hearing all of this just made Soule's suspicions grow even more. Now, the original autopsy that had been done on Janet made no mention of contact lenses. And apparently, during autopsies, medical examiners that's not really something they look for unless they are specifically told to look for it, right? So following this contact lens hunch, Soule decided to start the process of trying to get Janet's body exhumed. He wanted to see if her body still had her contact lenses. And at this point in time is when the FBI became involved with the case, along with the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation, SBI. And investigator Gerald Thomas with the SBI, he examined Raven's sweatshirt that he wore that night that Janet was murdered, and he discovered that there was a handprint on it, quote, that could have only been created by pressure from a living person. Investigator Gerald Thomas, remember that name, he will come up later. So as all that process, right, was getting started, apparently they had enough evidence, and so on Monday, February 1st, 2010, nearly 5 years after Janet's murder, Raven was finally arrested for her death. He was arraigned in a courthouse in Montpelier, Idaho. Remember, that's where he had moved after Vanessa dumped him. And he was held here while he awaited extradition to North Carolina on the first-degree premeditated murder charges. Durham Police Chief Jose Lopez said of this development, quote, "This arrest is the result of hard and tenacious work by our investigators and a strong partnership with the FBI and the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation, SBI. Investigators continued to follow leads and never gave up. I'm hopeful that this case brings about a feeling of hope by other families who are victims of homicides, and this should also bring hope to witnesses out there for other homicides that are unsolved. They know they can come forward because the system works, and we're going to work these cases." Dina and the rest of Janet's family was, of course, they were relieved, right? Finally, some progress is being made. They were kind of frustrated. Waited almost 5 years, man, right? But they were very well aware that this fight was only just beginning. Dina said the investigation had been, quote, "a hot case, then a cold case, then a hot case. An arrest is great, but we need a conviction. It's not over until there's a conviction." Through Tim Dowd, remember, he knew Janet and Raven quite well, him and his whole family. And at this point in time, if you will remember, he was now the spokesman for the Christensen family. So through Tim, the Christensen family put out a pretty long statement, part of which read, quote, "Throughout the years, the Christensen family has remained confident and held to the faith that one day there would be justice for Janet's murder. The Christensens are especially grateful to tireless efforts of detectives and agents with the Durham Police Department, North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation, and the FBI. As far as commenting on Raven's guilt or innocence, the family will leave that to the judicial system."
Do I think he was a flight risk? I think the fact that he had moved to Idaho and nobody knew about it was a little bit of cause for concern. None of us wanted to believe that Raven could have done this, yet there was patterns of behavior that, we needed to make the police aware of. Statements that were made that didn't add up. There were issues with other women, some financial issues. Think that you would give your daughter up to someone that would have the potential to murder is just, it's hard to even imagine going there,
By this time, Janet's family had also set up a website for her, www.tearsforjanet.com. And among other things, one of the things they expressed on that website was their frustration that Raven could not be charged with the murder of the unborn fetus that Janet was carrying. They thought it should be absolutely valid. And they said, quote, "It needs to be understood that in many murder cases that that involve an unborn child, the motivation of ending the unborn child's life is the primary driving force to commit the murder of the mother. The state of North Carolina needs to recognize and accept this by passing the fetal homicide law. And while we wholly agree and feel that the arrest of Raven brings that comment full circle, it also causes us great sorrow. Our primary concern is for the welfare of our grandson, Raven Abaroa. While the past 4+ years have been tough on all of those who love Janet, it has been especially hard on Caden. Yeah, definitely a complicated issue. What do you guys think about that? Because I know I've read about some murder cases where, like, the mom was murdered in, like, the 9th or 8th month of carrying the child, and the murderer could not be charged with the death of her unborn child. And yeah, I gotta imagine there's a lot of stickiness with that issue, right? Particularly in Janet's case, when she was like in such the early stages of pregnancy. Because I would guess the argument would be like, oh, you don't know if she could have miscarried or something like that, you know? It's definitely a sticky issue. But yeah, it's definitely complicated, right? I think what kind of is surprising to me is when the victim, the mother carrying the child, is like, in like her 9th month, and the murderer still can't be charged with the death of that child. Maybe because, like, right, even in childbirth, things can go really, really wrong. That's a lovely thought as someone in her 3rd trimester. But yeah, what do you guys think? What do you think about that? It's certainly complex, to say the very least, right? And at this point in time, Caden, he was about 5 years old, and he was currently being taken care of by Raven's parents in Utah. When Raven was arrested, he was transported to their custody. Which, isn't that always strange? I've noticed that. Someone brought this up in one of the true crime subreddits on Reddit, and they were like, yeah, why is it that, like, the child usually goes to the family of the suspect? And in this particular case, I'm wondering if it's because, like, I'm guessing, right, the goal is to try to, like, not interrupt the child's life as much as possible. And he'd been raised by Raven at this point, so he, like, knew his grandparents and stuff. I wonder if that was why. And the day after his arrest, on Tuesday, February 2nd, Raven said that he was going to fight extradition to North Carolina, which, of course, right, was just going to delay the process even further. His extradition hearing was then set for February 17th. Tim, commenting for himself, commented on this latest development. Quote, I have a hard time understanding that your wife was murdered and you can do an interview with TV but not talk with police. And through Tim, Janet's family commented. And they said that they certainly did not understand why Raven was fighting extradition because, quote, we would have assumed that Raven would have wanted to return to Durham to clear his name. And on Monday, February 15th, so right before Raven had his extradition hearing, a grand jury in Durham indicted him on Janet's murder. And at his extradition hearing that happened on Wednesday, February 17th in Bear Lake County, Idaho, Raven decided that, you know what, he was not going to fight extradition after all. He was going to allow investigators to take him back to North Carolina. And, like, I wonder if this was just a stall tactic on Raven's part, right? Like, because he knew that he would get an extradition hearing, and that was going to take some time. And then when it comes, right, he doesn't even put up, like, a fight, and he's just like, well, yeah, whatever, I'll go back to Durham and fight these charges. Or, I don't know, maybe he got some legal advice and knew that, like, he didn't really have much of a case. I don't know. But to me, it seemed like he was just trying to delay the process, maybe even spite Janet's family. He did request at this hearing that he would need a public defender for his upcoming trial. And on Friday, February 26th, Raven was transported back to Durham, North Carolina. Police Chief Lopez commented to the press, quote, this really shows that Durham police officers will follow any and all leads, no matter where we have to go. I would hope that other victims' families can rest easier knowing that if the need arises, we will pursue them wherever they take us. And he added that he hoped that people with information on other unsolved homicides would be encouraged to come forward. Quote, I'm hopeful that they know we will take them seriously. Tim, again speaking for the Christensen family, said of Raven arriving back in Durham, quote, we're glad he's back in North Carolina and now the process can move forward. I think if he gets on bail out here, I don't think you'll see him again. Adding that they were worried that he would be out on bond. And yeah, they thought maybe you wouldn't see him again. Tim added for himself, quote, he's gone by several different names. We know that he has at least 3 driver's licenses from 3 different states. And I'm wondering if that was like North Carolina, Utah, and Idaho, since that's where he had lived.
It kind of burns in your soul, you know? You know, young, pregnant women at home with their kid in the room next to them aren't supposed to be murdered brutally like this. Imagine pulling a wagon up a hill for 4.5 years, full of stones, and it's dragging you down, and you never think you're going to get to the top of the mountain. You never think you're going to get there. Well, guess what? We're there now.
And on March 2nd, 20 of Janet's family members and friends packed the first 2 rows of the courtroom for Raven's very first court appearance. It was before Superior Court Judge Ronald Stevens, and Tim told reporters afterwards, quote, "We're all a bit anxious to be physically in the same room, face to face with the person we suspect murdered our loved one. It's a little bit unnerving, but I think there's strength in numbers, and the family wanted to be here today. They wanted to make a statement that they'll be here throughout the entire process." Chapel Hill Public Defender Amos Tyndall was then selected to defend Raven. And Durham Assistant District Attorney Jim Dornfried did announce that the DA was considering going for the death penalty for Raven for this. His 2 options, if he was convicted, was life without parole or death. Raven was then sent to the Durham County Jail because he could not come up with his bail. Judge Stevens had set a $5 million bail on Raven due to all the evidence against him and the fact that he believed he was a flight risk. Tim said, quote, "Abaroa, in my opinion, looked visibly shaken when he said that." And at this point in time, Janet's family was also fighting for custody of Caden, who, remember, was in the custody of Raven's parents in Utah. So just a couple of days after this hearing, the DA's office came out and announced that they would, in fact, not go through with the death penalty for Raven, and this was due in large part to Janet's family not wanting it. They said that they wanted what was best for Caden. Quote, "Murder had already claimed his mother. They didn't want him to grow up without knowing his father either. There was no big argument. There was a discussion, and once it was known that the majority, especially the parents, weren't interested, everyone fell in line and it was off the table. Folks thought what would be best for Caden, and this was, of course, according to Tim." Apparently, Dornfried had approached the family and asked, what they would, prefer, and yeah, they were against the death penalty, and so the DA's office was like, all right, we won't go for that. Raven's next court hearing was then set for May. So, meanwhile, right, as Raven is stewing in jail, Soul is continuing to work the investigation, and he was especially concerned with the contact lenses. He really thought that was going to be key, and so in the very beginning of June 2010, Janet's family agreed to exhume her body. It had been interred in Pennsylvania, and Tim said, quote, "While this is heartbreaking and emotionally difficult for the family, it is yet one more example of this family's commitment to pursuing justice for Janet." Now, publicly, when the press asked Soul, whoa, why are you guys, wanting to exhume her body? Publicly, Soul said, well, we think that, her body, specifically her hands, could yield, knife markings. Remember, she was stabbed in her hand. They wanted to get fingerprints from her body, and they wanted to make biofoam casts of her hands. And then he added as sort of I think an aside, probably not to tip his hat too much to the defense, said that oh yeah, and we're also going to see if she was wearing her contact lenses. He said that this would just help make their case against Raven, and he didn't elaborate further. The Durham Police Department spokeswoman, remember Cammie Michael, she just said, quote, "The exhumation is part of the investigative process in this case," again refusing to elaborate further. Now, Tyndall, remember, that was Raven's attorney, said that his client was against exhuming Janet's body, but he wasn't going to stand in the way. Could he? Could he even stand in the way? I don't know. I mean, he was her husband when she was buried. I don't know. But yeah, he just said, quote, "We are not going to object to the state exhuming the body. As her husband, however, the idea of his wife's body being disturbed saddens Raven." So on Friday, July 9th, Franklin County, Pennsylvania Assistant District Attorney Laura Solkove, she filed the petition to the court on behalf of the Durham authorities to begin the process of exhuming Janet's body. However, after she submitted her motion, Tyndall and Raven decided, they were against this after all. And so Tyndall went to Chambersburg, Pennsylvania in an attempt to stop the process. In response to Solkove's petition, Tyndall said, quote, "The intentions of the analysts employed by the state of North Carolina are to conduct experiments that have no scientific validity and are designed to support conclusions the analysts have already reached." I mean, yeah, that's kind of how experiments work, man. You come up with, what you think, a theory, right? And then you do tests that will either prove or disprove your theory, right? And then afterwards, Tyndall said that it was after he read Sokoloff's petition that, they were against it. Like, saying that, like, well, if they just wanted to collect, like, DNA, that wouldn't have been a problem. But, like, you know, like, the biofilm casts and the contact lenses, like, that's just not going to yield anything useful. He especially said the contact lenses being there or not wouldn't prove anything. Quote, whether Mr. Abaroa told the investigators she went to bed or went to sleep, it is beyond dispute that she left the bed or awoke before the attack. Okay, yeah, but even if you say that, like, I really doubt someone who's being woken up like that is gonna, like, take the time to put their contacts back in. You know what I'm saying? And he added that the biofoam casts and the fingerprints that the prosecution wanted to collect, it wouldn't even yield results from a body that had already been buried for 5 years. Quote, the experiments involve attempting to compare tool markings on a deteriorated body, inflating the deceased's hands to make casts without knowing the original size of the hands, and taking prints from a body interred 5 years earlier. The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania can offer no scientific data showing an expectation of even modest success. He also was arguing that the original police officers who were witnesses to the original autopsy, they hadn't requested these things. So, like, why do they want them now? Maybe because there's different investigators involved with the case? He also argued that there was an investigator who concluded that the light blood stains on Raven's shirt that he wore that night could have come from Janet's hands. Quote, the agent believes that they were created when she was alive. The agent does not explain what details of his observation led him to these conclusions. Janet's family, of course, was not surprised, but definitely upset at Raven's attempt to stop this process. Quote, the family is united in their effort to pursue justice in this case and has had an extremely tough time with the very real stress surrounding the whole exhumation process. But they understand the importance of this initiative as part of an active, ongoing murder investigation. The fact that Mr. Abaroa has elected not to cooperate, despite his initial indication that he would, saddens the family but comes as no surprise, as he has never been engaged in helping authorities solve the brutal stabbing murder of his pregnant wife. His actions are certainly not appreciated by the Christensen family and will only serve to strengthen the resolve to push forward. Tim added, quote, this has been a heart-wrenching thing for them. And that same day, Franklin County Superior Court Judge Douglas Herman ruled against the defense and allowed the exhumation process to go forward.
This is about justice for Janet. You know, we're the voice of Janet. We're the only voice she has now. So I think that, you know, our goal here was just to prove to the court that, hey, as excruciatingly difficult as this is, it's necessary.
And on Monday, July 9th, Janet's body was finally exhumed, and they filmed the excavation process, right, of them digging up the grave and whatnot. But that wasn't without more added drama. So I guess the Christensens, in the end, were kind of upset about, like, how not necessarily the exhumation process, but, like, the collecting of evidence from Janet's body was going to proceed. So because Janet was Mormon, right, we mentioned that in part 1, she was buried in, I guess, like, sacred burial clothing. And before analysts and stuff would collect the evidence from her body, they wanted that clothing removed. But Raven and Tyndall had blocked that from happening. And also remember, as they were going to collect the evidence from Janet's body, they were also going to record it. You know, I'm going to guess that's probably, you know, normal operating procedure. And so, yeah, Janet's family wanted the sacred burial clothing removed. But yeah, like I just said, Raven and Tyndall blocked that from happening. Tim said, quote, the family is disappointed that their request to suspend videotaping during the portion of the procedure that would involve the removal of Mrs. Abaroa's sacred burial clothing was denied by Mr. Abaroa and his attorney, Amos Tyndall. As a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints himself, one would expect that Mr. Abaroa would understand the significance of this request, especially considering it has no evidentiary value. The Christensens have decided not to be present for the exhumation nor the reinterment. The family will, at a later date, have a private gathering at the cemetery. They, the authorities, have assured the family that throughout the exhumation process, Janet's body will be treated with respect and dignity. And yeah, I don't know about you guys. But I definitely feel like Raven did this, again, just to spite the Christensens. Everything he's done so far, I feel like, has just been to spite them, make the process harder. In, like, you know, obviously he wants to, defend himself, so his defense attorney is gonna, make arguments to delay processes, get stuff thrown out, but this in particular just seemed kind of spiteful to me. I don't know, what about you? In response to the statement, Tyndall said, quote, "This issue was not raised at the hearing or during discussions with the Commonwealth and state's investigators about the language of the order. We had no opportunity to consider it prior to late Friday and feel that we have to abide by Judge Douglas Herman's original order, given the extraordinary step of exhuming a body interred for over 5 years, the need for scrutiny of the entire process, and our inability to research what impact the request may have on the exhumation process." Janet's body was then transported to the Forensic Pathology Associates in Allenstown, Pennsylvania, and that was the following day. So her body was exhumed on Monday, July 9th, and then the next day, Tuesday, was when it was transported. And then by Wednesday, July 11th, her body had been reinterred. So pretty quick process. When ophthalmologist Dr. Charles Zwirling examined Janet's body, he found that it did indeed contain her contact lenses still. He said, quote, "After I received these fragments of the contact lenses and I then cleaned them, I think washed them with sterile water to get a better view, the material actually swelled from the water and resumed a convex shape typical of your contact lens. But the key finding was finding the numbers 1, 2, 3 on sample A. This was conclusive evidence that this was an AccuV contact lens." Additionally, analysts examined the cuts on Janet's hand. I believe it was specifically her left hand. The cuts had actually scraped and penetrated the bone. And they then compared these marks to the knife that Raven had sent to the police. Remember the one that he claimed that the police had overlooked at the crime scene and he sent it to them? Yeah, they compared those marks to that knife. And they concluded that those cut marks on Janet's hands were consistent with the type of knife that Raven had sent them. But since the knife had been so thoroughly cleaned, there was no way to conclusively prove that, that particular knife was indeed the murder weapon. On Tuesday, September 6th, Tyndall went to court to try to get a reduced bond for his client. He wanted it reduced to $500,000, but instead it was just lowered to $3 million. And so, time goes by, and still going through the court process. But the next year, in 2011, Get this. So remember Investigator Thomas with the SBI? Well, he and his mentor, Investigator Dwayne Deaver, who was the foremost expert in bloodstain pattern analysis, were both discredited for fabricating, ignoring, and withholding evidence in several criminal trials that they had been involved in. Can you believe that? Now, I know Deaver was fired that same year from the SBI in 2011. I could not find out any information of what happened to Investigator Thomas if he was also fired. But yeah, he was certainly discredited. And of course, as you can guess, when people like this are discredited and, stuff like this is found out, every single criminal trial that Deaver and Thomas had been a part of had to come under scrutiny and be kind of re-examined, right? And remember, that included Raven's sweatshirt. Investigator Thomas said that he found a hand print in blood on Raven's sweatshirt that could have only come from a living human. Well, yeah, now the prosecution had to go and get that re-examined. So they sent the sweatshirt to another analyst. He was a blood spatter expert named Herb McDonald, and he concluded that in his findings, he could not find any such bloodstain handprint on the sweatshirt. At least nothing that was consistent with a human handprint. Yeah. Can you... Why? Why fucking do that? I wonder if any convictions were overturned on any of the cases they worked because of that. Dude, first of all, you're messing with people's lives, all right? On both sides, the defense and the prosecution. You can't be doing that shit. People put their trust in you, that you know what you're talking about, that you are, trained and qualified and have no bias at all, right? You're just determined to follow the science. Yeah, and they just fuck that up. Isn't that... That's completely fucked, man. So, let's flash forward to the next year, 2012. Stuff is still, going through the process and all that. And on Monday, June 4th, 2012, Raven officially entered his not guilty plea, and his trial was slated to start in October of that year. However, we've covered enough cases to know that, of course, it wouldn't start in October 2012. It would be delayed until January of 2013, and eventually that would be delayed as well. But at the time, time when his trial was first slated to begin, Tim said for the family, quote, "We are pleased it is moving forward. It's been over 7 years. By the time we get to the trial, 7.5 years. So we are looking forward to this case being resolved and looking forward to the prosecution vigorously pursuing justice for Janet and her unborn child." On October 9th, 2012, Soule interviewed Raven behind bars, specifically about the backup to his laptop. If you remember from part 1, Sonia, Janet's sister, had found a CD copy of Raven's hard drive. And remember, the laptop was the other item that was supposedly stolen from the crime scene. And she had made copies and had handed them over to authorities. And so Soule was interviewing Raven about the backups for his computer. Raven said that he had the backup because, quote, "As we were packing things, we were trying to pick and choose things I needed in the immediate future versus things I wouldn't need. Remember, at the time that Janet was killed and the Abaroas were kind of going through a tough financial time, they were planning on moving back to Virginia closer to Janet's family so they can help them out." Soule then asked Raven, "Hey, are you aware that I actually have a copy of your laptop's hard drive, like the backup that you made?" And Raven just answered, quote, I don't know if any of that is relevant to my wife's murder, and that is my opinion." So let's flash forward to 2013. January of 2013, Raven's trial was delayed yet again. And on Monday, April 22nd, 2013, senior resident Superior Court Judge Orlando F. Hudson denied the defense's request for transcripts, copies of recorded conversations that Tim had had with investigators. They wanted these transcripts to show that Tim had given the investigators, like, information and evidence and stuff. They argued that since Tim had met with investigators several times and, like, you know, had a rapport with them and given them information and stuff, that made him, quote, "more than a witness, but part of the investigation." Assistant District Attorney Charlene Coggins-Franks, who would end up prosecuting this case, said that Tim was merely a spokesman for the Christensen family. Quote, "Dowd is a representative, a go-between for an extensive family. He was like a surrogate parent to Janet and Raven Abaroa." And Judge Hudson, in the end, agreed with the prosecution and refused to let the defense have those transcripts. This same day, Coggins-Franks filed a motion letting the court know that the prosecution wanted to use hearsay evidence in the upcoming trial. Some of the evidence they wanted to use, some of the hearsay evidence they wanted to use, rather, was like when in January of 2004, Janet had come to Tim and kind of confided in him about her and Raven's marital problems, how Raven had been cheating, how he had been threatening and abusive towards her, how he couldn't control his temper, and then how she was pregnant with Caden, and she wanted Tim to talk to Raven, see if, like, maybe he couldn't talk him into getting some help. And this would actually be a lot of the evidence that the prosecution would want to present at trial, is, you know, what Janet had confided into multiple people about her problems with Raven. Also, according to this evidence, Janet told Tim's daughter Megan, so Megan Dowd Counsel, I'm pretty sure is Tim's daughter, that Janet had come to her in January 2005 and confided in her that she was starting to get a little scared of Raven, that he really needed help, and to see if Megan maybe couldn't help talk him into counseling. And in the end, Judge Hudson agreed to allow all this hearsay evidence. He also ruled that the evidence collected by Sonia, remember the copy of Raven's hard drive, could be used in the trial as well. Now, the public was not told what this evidence Sonia had was, just that the judge had ruled that evidence that she had collected could be used, and that it dated to about the time of Janet's murder. Also, during this same day / hearing, Tyndall requested that potential jurors be questioned and spoken to individually when the prosecution and the defense were questioning them about domestic abuse issues, spousal abuse, and their experiences with it. And this was due to the pretrial publicity. Judge Hudson said that he wasn't so much concerned with pretrial publicity, but how deeply both sides were going to question jurors about these issues. And in the end, I could not find, what Judge Hudson had ruled, if the jurors would be questioned individually about those issues or not. But on Tuesday, the next day, April 23rd, 2013, jury selection finally began, but not before Judge Hudson denied the defense's motion to dismiss the case altogether, and this was just one of many that the defense would try, as we'll get into. Now, Tyndall claimed that there was DNA evidence at the crime scene that could exonerate his client because it didn't match Raven and it could have pointed to someone else. And specifically, he was citing the bloodstains that were found on the side door to the house. Remember, there was a side door that went to, I believe it was the driveway, I think, and they had found a little bit of blood staining there. And if you'll remember, those were first discovered by one of the first police officers on scene, Durham police officer Jason Williams. And apparently, Tyndall was arguing that an analysis of those bloodstain patterns showed that the blood belonged to a mix of two people. One of those people was Janet, but that the other person was not Raven. It came back as not a match to Raven. And then he said that the analyst who had, analyzed that for the police did not analyze it further and returned it to them in December of 2005. He also argued that other crucial evidence at the crime scene that hadn't been collected by police had been inadvertently destroyed by a church group who had went into the Abaroa home a few days after the murder, after it had been cleared as a crime scene, and cleaned it up for Raven, and they destroyed potential evidence that the police had overlooked. They also argued that some of that evidence that police failed to collect were computer storage devices in the Abaroa home and in their vehicles. Quote, I recognize that this is an unusual motion, but this is an unusual case, an unusual investigation. In 8 years, critical evidence to Mr. Abaroa's defense was intentionally destroyed or intentionally ignored. Judge Hudson disagreed with all this and denied the defense's motion, and he said, first, the defense would have to prove that the destruction of this evidence would indeed exonerate their client, and they would have to prove that it had been intentionally destroyed. And he said, quote, it's a hard thing to prove. So jury selection then proceeded. And on Monday, April 29th, 2013, a little over 7 years after Janet's death, opening arguments began in Raven's trial. 20 members of Janet's family and friends filled one side of the courtroom, and they all wore purple ribbons in memory of her, while Raven's family sat on the other side of the courtroom. And I believe that consisted of his mother and stepfather, Jim and Karen Bolton, his brother Derek, and I think he had a couple of friends who were going to testify as character witnesses for him as well. So the prosecution, as we said earlier, was led by Coggins Frank, along with Assistant District Attorney Luke Bum. And they began their opening arguments by painting Raven as a controlling, abusive husband. Bum told the jury in his opening remarks specifically that because there was no, eyewitness testimony, that their role as a jury in assessing the facts that they presented was crucial. Quote, I'm confident the state will be able to give you evidence sufficient to find the defendant guilty of first-degree murder. The defense, again, led by Tyndall and defense attorney Manny Dexter, countered that the prosecution's evidence was wholly circumstantial, that the jury needed to heed the evidence that they would present, and that the jury needed to heed the evidence that they maintained police had overlooked, which included the bloody footprint that was found next to Janet. Remember, we went over that in part 1. That blood spatter found on the door frame by Officer Williams, and a coin found near a creek that was on the Abaroa property on the night of the murder. He told the jury that of the 5 investigators who had worked the case over the past 8 years, 7-8 years, some were not even aware that the blood spatter on the door frame that it had not come back as a match to Raven. He claimed that some of the investigators who led that case were not even aware of that fact. He also said that witnesses who would be testifying had since significantly changed their stories. Quote, Raven Abaroa was always treated like a suspect. There's been a total focus on Raven Abaroa's past and future sins, and not on the crime scene. The further away you get from the trail of evidence, the closer an innocent man is to being convicted of murder. So after opening arguments on that first day, Janet Christensen, Janet's mother, testified, and she spoke about just how close her and her daughter had been through all of Janet's life, but that after her daughter had married Raven, that it was a little difficult to get a hold of Janet directly, unless it was through her work phone or Janet called them from a payphone or something. She said that whenever she would call the home, it was always Raven who would answer or call her back.
Were you close with your daughter, Janet?
Yes.
And how often would you say that you spoke with her?
It was hard to get a hold of her because whenever I called her cell, Raven usually called us back. So I didn't talk to her too often. She did tell me when I wanted to call her at work, but I didn't feel that that was exactly appropriate.
And when she did come and see you, you had conversations with her, didn't you?
Well, we visited, but we didn't have mother-to-daughter, heart-to-heart conversations because Raven was always with her. You know, we didn't have really alone time.
And she also testified that her daughter confided in her when Raven was, cheating and they were separating and were having a lot of issues.
But you also did have some conversations with her about some of the troubles that she was having.
Janet kept pretty private. So she did call me once and told me that she was expecting and Raven had left her and I wasn't supposed to tell anybody.
And she told you about Raven being unfaithful to her, didn't she?
She did. But she was just so devastated that she did tell me that.
She testified that she asked her daughter if Raven had ever hit her, and her daughter said no, but that he was verbally and emotionally abusive.
When she was sharing some of these concerns with you about her marriage, at one point you specifically asked her if Raven was violent towards her, didn't you?
What I asked is, did he ever hit you?
And her answer to you was no, wasn't it?
No, he never hit. Because she said that he would be up and happy, and then he'd be way down. And when he was way down, she said what he did was verbally abuse me.
Barbara Parsons testified she was the 911 dispatcher who had spoken to Raven that night during the 911 call. And they played the entire 911 call during the trial. And afterwards, right, the prosecution then asked Barbara about it. And she said that Raven's responses to her, directions and stuff were certainly different than what she had experienced. She went on to say, quote, "Normally, a caller wants someone to help them. He didn't want to do CPR. He said she was not with him. He was calm, which was unusual, and then hysterical. He seemed more interested in getting his bishop than in doing something to help his wife."
What, if anything, sticks out to you about this call compared to the others, if there is anything?
People have a tendency to freak and re-freak when you're talking to them. He was different in his responses to the questions.
What do you mean?
Like when you ask, normally when somebody calls you and somebody's not breathing, they want you to help them. He did not appear to, he did not want to do CPR. He said that she was not with him.
Anything else?
He was very calm, which I found unusual, but then he would be hysterical.
Do you notice anything else?
He seemed more interested in getting his bishop than in doing something to help his wife.
Barbara had been a dispatcher, specifically a supervisor, for 22 years, which is why the prosecution wanted to get, her assessment of what she thought, Raven was like on this call, because she had taken lots of them, right? And yeah, she said it was certainly different. That, most people, when they call for 911 for help, they're like, oh my God, help me, what do I do? And she kind of tells them that, but not once did Raven do that, which was, a little odd to her. On cross-examination, Tyndall asked her if people just respond differently to emergency situations, and she conceded that yes, that is true. And of course, right, we know what he's doing. He's trying to cast reasonable doubt, which, it's his job. Defense attorneys, they're just as important of a process, even if they're, defending scumbags. The Abaroa's next-door neighbor, Lisa Seeley, also testified she did not personally know the couple. That was mainly because Raven and Janet had just moved in, so, she didn't really get a chance to really know them. But she said, yeah, it was, one of those neighborhoods that was pretty quiet, and that kind of everyone knew everyone. And she said she heard and witnessed, at least on 3 different occasions, Raven and Janet fight. And she said it stood out to her because, again, Her neighborhood was, it's a quiet neighborhood. She described the fights that she overheard. Quote, "It was very heated, very intense, and there was a lot of cursing."
And if I could take you back to 2005, April of 2005, do you remember what was going on in your neighborhood during that time period?
It's just the same thing. It's a very family-friendly neighborhood. There was a few things that were out of sorts, which wasn't normal. I was overhearing some arguments, which was very abnormal.
When you say you were hearing arguments from this household, do you remember how often you heard arguments?
I know of at least 3 times that I heard it. They were usually about mid-mornings. They were very heated, very intense, a lot of cursing. But I didn't stay out there to listen to, to get all the drama or anything like that. I just went back into the house.
Could you tell what was being said?
It was just a very intense exchange, loud enough for me to hear it across the street, which is very abnormal for our neighborhood. I could hear Raven just because of the male voice being able to carry, but I also would hear, Janet. So there was exchange, but I didn't hear specifics. As I said, I had no intention of, getting out there to hear all the stuff at all.
She also described this one time, right? She was rounding the corner in her car on her way home, and as she rounded the corner, she saw Raven in his Dodge Durango driving, and Janet was on the hood of the car. And of course, Lisa stopped them to ask, oh my God, is everything all right? And she said Raven told her, quote, "Said they were just playing around. Janet Abaroa agreed. She appeared like everything was fine. Don't worry about anything. Like 2 kids getting caught, like a fun trip around the block."
Now, prior to April 26, 2005, did you ever see anything unusual between the defendant and his wife?
It was either a week or 2 weeks prior to that. And again, only because of the arguments, this seemed off to me. Raven was driving his Durango. Janet was on top of the hood of the Durango, and that was unusual to me. When I did, I actually stopped them, and I asked if everything was okay, and Raven, he kind of laughed it off, and I looked over at Janet to make sure that she was okay, and she laughed it off too, but I put that off to 2 kids just got caught, just got called out on something, and that's kind of like a covering of each thing. So I was just concerned because it was just abnormal behavior, especially with the arguments that I had witnessed or heard.
And as you'll see in the clip that I'll show of her testimony, she was saying that it looked like Raven had taken off before Janet could get into the passenger seat because of the way Janet was on the hood.
And you said it was a week or 2 weeks earlier. Where did you first see the Durango? Where in the neighborhood with Janet on the hood?
He had pulled out of his driveway and was getting ready to go around the corner of the street, and I had just come around the corner. So if the Durango was up in the driveway, that was a little distance down from the driveway for her to have been on the hood and to come out, and he had started around the bend, but he wasn't quite there, and so I stopped, and that's why I asked.
Could you explain how Janet was holding on to the hood of the Durango?
As I recall, she was hanging on, if this is the windshield here, and Raven's looking out, it seems like she was holding on to the top that way. I think that's the way she was able to hold on, or maybe a hand to the side, I'm not sure, but holding on like that, but she was kind of catty corner.
Can you describe whether she was more in the middle, in front of the driver's door, or in front of the passenger door?
She was more towards the passenger door, but kind of catty corner across, like she was, kind of catty corner towards the passenger side.
When you say that, you mean head one way, feet the other?
Yes.
Where would the head have been closer to?
Towards the front. It's almost like she was, my interpretation of that was like if you're running towards to get in the car, but you don't quite make it, and you're running towards the passenger side and you're just grabbing and you're hanging on. That's, if that makes sense.
And on cross-examination, Tyndall pointed out that in the Abaroa's neighborhood, in fact, during the month that Janet was murdered, there had been 14 other break-ins in that neighborhood. And in fact, when Lisa was testifying and he was cross-examining her, she said that, at one point in time, her car was, broken into. She said it wasn't locked, so, can't, not window smashed or anything, but she left the car unlocked, and someone had taken a handful of change from her center console, no more than $2 in change.
Yes, and I don't recall the exact time, but my vehicle, it wasn't really broken into, and I say that only because it was unlocked. So someone came in to my vehicle and they did remove some change, and I did report that.
Again, you can see what Tyndall's doing, right? Trying to create reasonable doubt that it could have been someone else. Donna Jackson, of course, also testified. If you remember from part 1, she was one of the police investigators at the scene, and she also was one of the investigators who had examined Janet's body. And part of what she was questioned about was, again, right, some of the supposed evidence that police didn't collect or really pay attention to, and that included that bloody footprint found next to Janet's body. And Jackson testified that she was told that the footprint actually belonged to one of the first responders who had accidentally kind of created it, but she couldn't remember when or who had told her that. All the other investigators, right, testified to what we already went over, including the medical examiner, Dr. Thomas Clark, and he pretty much, talked about the autopsy findings, which we went over in part 1. And it was said, of course, that was pretty rough for Janet's family to sit through, especially because they were also showing the autopsy photos, And now let's get into kind of the crux of the prosecution's evidence, which was, right, the quote unquote hearsay evidence. Because this was sort of the prosecution's strategy, right? On top of trying to use the forensic evidence they had, they also wanted to use character witnesses to describe the Abaroa's marriage, how controlling and how much of an asshole Raven actually was, what Janet had told people, So a lot of the Abaroas and Janet's friends and acquaintances testified, including Adrian and Brittany. Brittany testified about the story we went over in part 1, including Raven's knife collection and all that. She testified that Janet knew of about 3 affairs that Raven had had, but she suspected there had been more.
And at any time did she ever talk to you about her separation or a problem with the defendant?
Yes.
Do you remember when that was?
It was in 2004. It was about spring break time. They were separated. She said she knew of 3 people that he had affairs with, and she was sure that there were more. She was very, very upset.
Did you ever find out whether she and the defendant got back together?
Yes.
How did you find that out?
Well, Janet had called me several times telling me how abusive that Raven was, mentally, emotionally, and how hard it was, and she was going to leave him. They had agreed that when they got married, that the only reason for divorce was if someone was unfaithful, and he did say that he was unfaithful, and so she thought that she contemplated leaving at that time, but then found out she was pregnant and didn't feel that she could leave. She told me that her greatest fear was that her child would ever be alone with Raven.
And she said that she personally had cut ties with Raven not long after Janet's murder because she, quote, felt like Raven was lying. Adrian testified, again, to everything we kind of went over in part 1, including the day of Janet's murder, how Adrian was one of the last people to talk to her. She also talked about an incident that occurred about 5 months before Janet's murder. She was an insurance agent working for an insurance company in Utah at that time. And Raven had come to her and talked to her over lunch one time. I think he was visiting his family while there. And so while he was there, they had lunch, and he wanted to question Adrian about some life insurance policies. Now, Adrian informed Raven that, from her experience, due to Janet's past health problems, the most she could probably qualify for a life insurance policy was $500,000. Remember, I don't think anyone knew about the life insurance policy that Raven had on himself and Janet. She said, quote, "He told me he could do better. He could find a better company for cheaper."
You said insurance office. Were you working there?
I was working for my uncle. He was a life insurance agent, and my cousin was a property and casualty agent.
What happened during lunch, if anything?
Just our normal conversation. At one point, Raven was, I felt like, quizzing me about life insurance policies.
What was he asking?
He was asking if he could get us, pricing on certain values. And he had mentioned that he could either get $1 million or $500,000 on Janet.
Did he talk specifically about an insurance policy on Janet?
It was both of them.
And what happened during the conversation when he was talking about getting $1 million on Janet?
I had mentioned, because they had done a lot of the physicals were done in my office, and then it kind of determines what level you qualify for. And I said, well, with the ectopic pregnancy and some other health things that she had told me about, I don't think she would qualify for that $1 million. And I said, I don't know if she'd qualify for the $500,000. I would have to, crunch the numbers and whatnot.
Did he ask you to check and see?
No, he told me, when I told him about how much it cost, he told me he could do better. He could find a better company for cheaper.
Now, did you know whether he or Janet had any insurance prior to this conversation?
Not that I was aware of. I had never asked.
She also confirmed that the rough time the couple were having, that Janet had told her about, how, unstable Raven's mood and behavior was, how Janet had confided in her that she was afraid of leaving Raven alone with him. Quote, "She said he couldn't stand to look at her and that he felt guilty. I'd get an email from Janet a week later and Raven was preaching about how much he loved her and how much she meant to him. She told me her greatest fear was that her child would ever be alone with Raven."
She said she was happy with Caden, and that if they ever got divorced, her biggest fear was to have her child be left with Raven.
She tell you why?
She just didn't trust him.
She explained how her friend that she had known since college had been, quote, beaten down by Raven, whereas once Janet was very optimistic and happy and outgoing, she had become very sort of reserved, insecure, unsure of herself. Quote, "The loving, charismatic Janet that I knew no longer existed after being in a relationship that was so abusive for so long. Her only motivation once Caden was born was Caden and keeping Raven happy." And remember when we talked about how Raven had different recollections of events the night Janet was murdered? And it depended on who he was talking to. We went through a couple of those in part 1. Well, Adrian testified to another version that Raven had told her. So first, he told her that he never cheated on Janet. And he told her that though he did have some problems, Janet forgave him. Quote, "He told me that he had treated her perfectly. He said, I did more for her than most husbands do for their wives."
Did he ever talk to you about the problems that he and Janet had?
He told me he treated her perfectly. He said, I did more for her than most husbands do for their wives. He did say that they had had some problems and that he said, Janet forgave me, and hopefully you can forgive me too.
Did he ever tell you about the other women?
He told me he never cheated on his wife.
The audacity of this bitch. Can you believe that? And she recounted what Raven had told her about the night Janet died. He told Adrian that after finding Janet dead on the floor, he went to the office that I think was the next room over to try to call 911 from the office phone, but that it was dead. Quote, "I don't know if this is before or after. He said he tried to do CPR, and that's how he got blood all over him." She testified that Raven told her that he held his wife. And, quote, "She was really warm, and then he said he held her again, and she was really cold." She said Raven told her that he ran to his SUV to get a cell phone to call 911, but it was locked, so he ran back inside to get keys, and then called 911 on his cell phone.
He said when he returned to the house, that he parked in his normal spot by the side door. And he said when he went in the house, the door was ajar, but he didn't think anything of it. He said he walked upstairs, or he placed his gear down and whatnot in the kitchen. Said he walked upstairs, went into Caden's room, and he was sleeping, and he gave him a kiss goodnight. Then he said he went by the office and he flipped the light on and said he saw Janet lying there in blood.
Did he say whether he did anything?
He said that he went to use the office phone, but it was dead. And so I don't know if this was before or after, but said the office phone was dead. He said he tried to do CPR and that's how I got blood all over me. And then he remembered his phone was in the Durango. So he said, I ran down the stairs and ran into the wall, and so I got blood all over the wall. And then I ran out to the Durango, and it was locked. So I was pounding on the windows to try and break the window so I could get in. And then he said he remembered his keys were in the house. So he went in the kitchen and got his keys, unlocked the Durango, got his cell phone, and called 911.
Did he ever tell you a different story?
One time he said when he had gone up there, he held her and she was really warm, and then he held her again and she was really cold.
Additionally, she testified that after Raven had moved back to Utah, where she was living at the time, Raven told her that he was in constant contact with the police.
Yeah.
He just told me that he was in constant contact with the police, but that they would not tell him anything. He felt like they were trying to pin it on him. He said, I told them that I was willing to submit my DNA. I would do whatever they wanted me to do to help find who killed my wife.
Constant contact with the police, and that they had actually told him that they had found unknown DNA at his home and that they were actually profiling a suspect.
Did he ever come to your office?
He did on one occasion. At the insurance office.
What happened on that occasion?
He called me and said he was on his, if he could stop by, and I said sure. He had some information for me from the police officers, and I was alone at the time, and so I stepped out into the front lobby where there's a couch, and I sat on the couch and waited for him. And when he got there, he was really excited and said, I just got off the phone with the detective, and I'm really excited because they found a third DNA that does not belong to me, and they're profiling the suspect.
Now, Adrienne, of course, I don't think she wasn't believing a lot of what Raven was saying. She contacted the Durham authorities, and she asked them, to confirm what Raven had told her, and, what do you think they told her? No, we're not profiling a suspect. We haven't spoken to Raven. He hasn't been very open or cooperative with us at all. She also explained of when she finally cut contact with Raven. It was several years after the murder. And it was when he contacted her because he wanted her to be a character witness for him in a primetime news show that was doing a profile on the murder. I wonder if maybe it was the ABC investigation that started in 2009. I'm not sure. But she said, quote, I couldn't do it anymore. I had caught him in enough lies. I felt like I couldn't do it anymore, so I changed my phone number and blocked his email.
It was, the last I'd heard from him was right around the time that Primetime Crime was going to do a story on the murder. And I got an email asking for character witnesses and kind of where I stood. And I was so stressed out, I'd had enough that I couldn't do it anymore. I had caught him in enough lies, and I didn't feel like I could do it anymore, so I changed my phone number and I blocked him from my email.
Yeah. Another friend and co-worker of Janet's named Kathy Cheek also testified. She said that Janet had confided in her about some of her marital problems, including when her and Raven were separated. Quote, she said that he had left her, that he just couldn't do it anymore, that he left, and that he needed to get away. She just said that she was sad and lonely and didn't understand why he left, why things were the way they were. I knew they had several problems, financial problems, infidelities. To me, I called it a mess.
You said she told you. Do you remember what she told you?
She said that he had left her, that he just couldn't do it anymore. He left. He needed to get away.
Did she tell you why they had separated?
No.
During this separation, did she tell you anything else?
She just said she was sad and lonely, and she didn't understand why he left, why things were like they were.
and that she wished they could be different.
She also said that every day she took Janet to her house for lunch and fed her because Janet told her that, she had no money in her account. Raven had emptied the bank accounts, and so she didn't have money for food.
Why did you go to your house every day at lunch?
It was right up this road, 5 minutes, and it was close.
And did Janet bring her own food?
No, we would eat at my house, or my food.
And why was that?
Because she didn't have any money.
Isn't that sad? That just broke my heart. Janet had also confided in Kathy when she became pregnant with Caden. Quote, she cried and said it wasn't going to be good, that Raven wasn't going to be happy that she was pregnant because he didn't want a child at that time. I told her to take it one day at a time and hope for the best.
Did you ever find out she was pregnant?
I did. I found out the day that she found out.
How did that happen?
She had come to work, I think it was January, February, can't remember for sure. And she was having really bad pains in her stomach. And I talked her into going to the doctor because she didn't know if it was something to do with a tubal pregnancy that she had earlier. So she went to the doctor and came back. She sat down, she was crying. So I didn't approach her at that time. I knew she would roll back and let me know what was happening. And finally she did, and she said she was pregnant. And then she just cried. She cried and said that it wasn't going to be good, that Raven wasn't going to be happy that she was pregnant because he didn't want a child at that time.
And what happened?
Well, I think that they were probably separated then. She of course stayed pregnant, and she just did her work, and she was very upset lots of days, and she just cried because she didn't understand why he was treating her that way.
She also testified that Janet told her when she was pregnant with her and Raven's second child, one of the very few people who knew. Kathy said that Janet told her that the second pregnancy was definitely going to complicate things, that Raven was definitely not going to be happy, and that he didn't want more children. Kathy also testified how Janet had confided in her about Raven's unstable moods. She said Janet told her that as long as, quote, he took his medicine, he was fine. However, quote, when he didn't, he was verbally mean. And she did not know what medication Raven was supposed to be on or what medication Janet was talking about. She did say, though, that on at least 2 occasions, 2 months before her death, Janet had called her and asked if her and Caden could spend the day with her, quote, because Raven was in one of his moods.
After January of 2005, did she ever come to your house anymore?
She did. She came twice. They were in April or May, it was springtime of 05.
She was murdered April 26th, so would it have been before then?
It was prior to that. It was beginning of April.
And do you know what day of the week it may have been?
It was more than likely a Saturday.
Had you invited her over? I mean, how did she end up at your house?
She called me from a payphone, upset, and wanted to know if she could come over with the baby, that she needed to get away that day because Raven was in one of his moods, she said. Told her, sure, come on over, and you don't have to call, you just come over.
On both of these occasions, did she come over?
She did.
And what happened whenever she would come over?
She would be upset when she came over, but once she got in the house with the baby, you know, me and my husband, we'd calm her down, and she knew my son, and we'd play with the baby. We tried not to talk about what had happened, because to me, it's like she was coming to my house to get away. And I'm sure she didn't want to talk about it, so I didn't bring it up.
Did she ever talk about it?
And she just said he was in one of his moods, angry. And I don't know about what.
And you said this happened twice?
Yes, ma'am.
And do you know why she called you from a payphone?
Because she didn't want Raven to know she had called me.
Well, why would she call you from the payphone?
Because when they had got back together, he had told her he was going. She talked him into going to get help again. He said as long as he took his medicine, he was okay. But when he didn't take it, he would be his normal self again. So she wanted to come to my house without him knowing because he had told her that she needed to quit talking about their personal life to co-workers.
And get this next part, all right? So a childhood friend who had grown up with Raven, knew him, I think, all throughout elementary to high school, testified. Her name was Mackenzie Folster. all right? She had lost contact with Raven after he went off to college, right? But they were pretty close friends. They'd always been honest with each other, right? And she testified to when Raven first contacted her after she lost contact with him after he went off to college. It was when Janet was pregnant with Caden and him and Janet were separated, all right? So get this shit. All right. So Raven called up his old childhood friend and wanted advice because, again, remember I said this is when Janet was pregnant with Caden and they were separated. And he wanted advice from Mackenzie. He told Mackenzie that Janet was having affairs, that he suspected that Janet was having an affair with her old high school boyfriend, Scott, how Janet was the one who was abusive in the relationship. Yeah. Janet was the one that was abusive. And he told Mackenzie that he wasn't even sure that the baby was his.
He called me and had concerns because he let me know that him and Janet had separated and that she was pregnant and that he did not feel that the child was his and he wanted some advice.
What, if anything, did he tell you about his separation and Janet being pregnant?
He said that he had been faithful, that it was mutual, that they had separated, and that he thought that she had gone back dating her ex-boyfriend, and that he thought the child was, I think his name was Scott.
What did he say about the child?
That he thought maybe Scott was the father.
Yeah, this motherfucker, are you kidding me? Projection, thy name is Raven. Are you kidding me? Yeah. Janet was the one that couldn't keep it in her pants, and Janet was the one that was an abusive prick. Can you I could not believe when I heard Mackenzie's testimony. I was like, what? So he, like I said, he called Mackenzie because he wanted her advice. And Mackenzie just said, like, oh, that sucks, but like, here, just take it a day at a time. And when the baby's born, just get a paternity test and go from there.
And you said he called you for advice?
Yes.
And what happened?
I just told him, when the baby was born to get a paternity test and to listen to his gut. And, our relationship had been pretty honest until then, I guess.
And so Raven hung up, and then he said, oh, don't ever let my wife know I contacted you. She'd be really uncomfortable with it. And that kind of struck Mackenzie as odd. She's like, that's kind of weird.
I chose not to communicate with him because he told me that Janet didn't know about him talking with me, and I didn't understand that, and I chose to leave it at that.
She then said that she did not hear from Raven again until about September 2006, all right? So Raven was in Utah, Janet had already been murdered, and Raven had contacted her via classmates.com. The two started chatting again, and Raven gave her phone number, and they had several phone conversations. They never met up in person. This time, he admitted to Mackenzie that, you know what, I did have some affairs when I was married to Janet, but it's okay, she was totally cool with it. And Mackenzie testified that this was certainly odd to her. She's like, I don't know a woman alive that would be okay with her husband fooling around.
But he also told me that he did have an affair with a girl at work, but Janet knew and was okay with it. And that really bothered me because I don't know any woman that would be okay with it.
I mean, open relationship is one thing, right? But yeah, this was not that. Raven also told her that Janet did not do what he wanted, specifically when it came to the way that she dressed and the church.
Ever talk to you about anything to do with the church?
Yes, he said that the church was really good to him, and that he felt like he had a friendship with the bishop and everybody there, but she just did not do what he asked her of her when it came to the LDS church, with her garments and the way she dressed and all that.
I know at one point he did tell Mackenzie that his wife had been murdered, but he assured her he was not a suspect. He told her that he had the support of both families, and he also told her that he thought it might have been one of Janet's lovers who had killed her.
He said that the first thing he said, he was not a suspect, and that he was cooperating and helping out in every way.
Did he tell you anything else?
Yes. It was a very long conversation. He told me that he thought maybe that she could have had an affair and it went wrong, or that there was drugs involved and it went bad. He just kind of had a couple different things.
He also told Mackenzie that for a brief period he stayed with some of Janet's family in Virginia, but that one of Janet's sister's husbands had abused Janet and he couldn't put up with it or something. It was very weird. I'll show you the video clip. It's weird.
We had long talks about it, and he said that he moved back home. He moved with her family, and it didn't go very well because he confronted them about the abuse that Janet had endured. And he told me that it was through I think her sister's husband was the one that had abused her.
He also told Mackenzie about some of the embezzlement, and another theory he had about who could have murdered Janet was he was like, maybe I was a target because of the embezzlement. And guys, get this. He also told Mackenzie that Janet was all in on the embezzlement scheme. She knew all about it. She was an equal part of it, and that she wasn't as innocent as she seemed. He told her that the only reason he even got prosecuted was because the media got hold of the story and they wanted blood.
And he also thought that he could have been the target because the things that were missing were his. He told me that it was that he actually stored the stuff in his home and that Janet knew about it. And she was part of it, and she wasn't as innocent as she looked.
What, if anything else, did he tell you?
He said that the only reason that he thought that he was prosecuted was because that the media wanted blood.
Yeah. What the fuck? Now, during their very last conversation, this was the last conversation Mackenzie opted to have with Raven, she was a bit disturbed when Raven told her, oh, hey, yeah, I'm back in Utah. In fact, I'm actually in your neighborhood. I thought you still lived here, but I guess you don't live here anymore. And he said he had moved there because, yeah, he thought she still lived there. And Mackenzie said on the stand that she found this very weird and disconcerting. And she opted for this to be the last conversation she had with Raven.
The reason why we didn't have a person-to-person conversation is because he told me that he moved into my old neighborhood because he thought I still lived there. And really bothered me. That was our last conversation.
Dudes, is your blood boiling yet? The women who Raven had sexually coerced and harassed also testified, and this included Annabelle Havisa, Charlotte Ravel, and Megan Dowd Council. They all testified to the things that we went over in part 1. Annabelle's testimony was especially sad. She definitely broke down in tears and said that, after the incident with Raven where she felt like she had to have sex, she felt so small, felt so little, that she just wanted the whole thing to be over with and that she was deathly afraid of Raven.
Out of embarrassment, the whole thing just makes me feel small and little. Just wanted to be done with it.
I understand this is not something that you're very proud of or anything, but certainly when you talked to the officers the initial time, you did not describe Mr. Abaroa's behavior as being aggressive or anything like that, did you?
I did not use the word aggression, but I felt hopeless, backed into a corner. I didn't really have much of a choice, because I just felt I had to trust my inner gut, and I just felt very uncomfortable. I felt very unsafe. And in some regard, he was a little aggressive.
Charlotte recounted her disturbing incident with Raven that we went over in 2003. Quote, what he was showing me, I didn't want to see, so I was trying to pull away from him. I was completely freaked out. I didn't know what to do.
I called Raven because I was having a problem at work, and I looked up to him for business advice. So I called him, and I was upset, and he was like, well, I'm at home. If you want to come by, then maybe we can talk about it and figure out, how to fix your problem. So I was there for maybe 5 minutes, and then he told me he wanted to show me something on the computer.
When did you find out Janet was not home?
I found out she wasn't home when he tried to get me to sit in his lap, and he just kept telling me he wanted to
show me something on the computer.
And then what happened?
What he was showing me I did not want to see. So I was trying to pull away from him, like, stop, gross, this is terrible, I don't want to have anything to do with this. And then right as that happened, Janet came home.
What was the defendant showing you?
It was a homemade sex tape.
Who was in the homemade sex tape?
The defendant and Janet.
Now, when you saw what was on the computer, did you turn around and leave him?
Yeah, and then she came in the door, and he said, she doesn't know you're here, she's not going to like it if you're here. And all of this happened very fast. So he was like, you have to go hide, you have to go hide. So he almost like physically pushed me. He didn't hurt me or anything, but he pushed me into the closet.
And when he pushed you in the closet, what happened?
I was completely freaked out. I didn't want to be hiding in a closet. I didn't do anything wrong, so I didn't know what to do. Now I know what I would have done. I would have left immediately, but I felt like I couldn't because she was walking in the door. She was only there for a break, so I just stayed until she left, and then I left. But then that was the last time I ever went over there.
Megan testified to what we went over in part 1, and she testified that Janet had confided in her about late 2004, early 2005, somewhere around there, about the problems her and Raven were having. Quote, she told me things were getting weird and that Raven was making her nervous, that she was scared of him, and yeah, kind of telling her about Raven's unstable mood and whatnot. She said at this time, though, at this particular event she was recounting, that before Janet could divulge further or that Megan could ask her further, Raven entered the room at that point. Quote, Janet bowed her head and just looked like a scared animal. I never had the opportunity to speak alone with her again.
We were the only two in the house or within earshot, and I followed up and asked her how things had gone about following up on our previous conversation about therapy. She said she had tried and used some of the tactics we had talked about, and she said that he refused to go. He said he didn't have a problem and was not going to see a therapist.
What else did she tell you?
She told me things were getting weird and that Raven was making her nervous. She was scared of him.
Did she explain to you how Raven was making her nervous or why she was scared of him?
No, because we were interrupted. She had just said that, and we were sitting facing the television, and the front door was behind us, and Raven had come in, and just as she had said that, she was scared of him and he was making her nervous, he walked right up on us and startled us, and I'm very extroverted, and she bowed her head and just went into she looked like a scared animal. And I just popped up and said, what are you doing, And he said, what are y'all doing? And I said, we're just talking, playing with the baby, and just kind of diffused that situation. And then I never had the opportunity to speak alone with her again.
She also testified how Janet had suspected that Raven had bipolar disorder. Quote, she didn't know who she was going to have to deal with each day. Raven was never the same person. His mood could be one way one day and completely different the next.
In 2004 was when she made the comment that he had screws loose, and she said it was difficult before they had separated. She didn't know who she was going to have to deal with each day, and that was really hard on her. And that's part of the reason she wanted him to go to therapy and thought it could be bipolar, because she said it was never the same person. I didn't understand. I said, what does that mean? She was like, his mood could be one way one day and completely different the next. He was mean to her. I mean, she's just said they had been fighting, and, I knew they were separated. She just said, things weren't good and that she left, and I think the baby's what made her want to try to get him in therapy so they could try to work it out, but just that he was, his mood was different, and she wanted him to go to therapy.
But, she said that despite numerous pleas from Janet and other people, that Raven just refused to get help, refused to see therapist, counseling, or anything. Sandy Garretton, remember, Raven's old boss, she testified, specifically testified, I think, about Raven as an employee and the last day that she saw Raven, the day Janet was murdered. And Jennifer Walker also testified, remember? That was the woman who Raven had been sleeping with and seeing after he and Janet had separated. And she would actually testify twice, for the prosecution and for the defense. So when the prosecution asked her if she remembered an email that Raven had sent her, in which I guess he dreamed that, he beat up a guy she was seeing, Jennifer said that she, quote, vaguely recalled that.
And at the time that you were with Raven and seeing Raven, flirting with Raven, what was your boyfriend's name at that time?
Joe.
And at some time after Janet had a baby, you had a baby too, didn't you?
I had a baby 4 years ago.
Is that Braden?
No, it's a girl.
Okay, who's Braden?
I don't know.
And you also had a conversation with Raven about when he was trying to take the baby from Janet, right?
I don't recall that.
Oh, you don't recall it?
No, I do not.
Well, do you recall the email from Raven about his dreams about you and how he was going to beat up somebody and he woke up in bed with you the next day? You remember that?
I just read that email with his lawyer.
So do you remember?
I vaguely remember.
So you vaguely remember the other one too about the baby, don't you?
Well, I read that too, but I don't remember any of that. I don't even know that that's an email. It doesn't appear to be an email. It looks like something that's just typed.
And yeah, of course, she went over how her and Raven had a relationship and how after, Janet became pregnant, that they kind of broke up. The prosecution then handed the jury a 228-page document, and this was the hard drive that Sonia had copied. And it just had a copy of all the files, the modified date, and all of that stuff. Detective Steve Vaughn, if you remember, he was one of the leads on the case at one point. He testified as well. And he testified, about his interviews with Raven. And on cross-examination, when Tyndall asked Detective Vaughn if investigators had collected the clothing that baby Caden was wearing that night, he admitted that, he did not. Apparently, Caden's clothing had some blood staining on it. I'm going to guess maybe from Raven picking him up. Tyndall also asked Vaughn if investigators had ever followed up on the recent break-ins that had occurred in the Abaroa's neighborhood right around the time of Janet's murder. And Detective Vaughn admitted that he did not. Detective Benny Bradley also testified. Remember, he was also a lead investigator on the case at some point. And he testified to all the evidence that he had gone over when he was lead investigator. And he mainly focused on the Abaroa's financial situation. And he kind of testified to what we said Sol already found before, that the Abaroas were spending more than they were making, their bank account was in the negative, they were not in a good financial situation at the time of Janet's murder. And of course, this was really trying to set up the motive. The prosecution was trying to say that it was definitely financial, and that was why Raven had, murdered Janet. That's also why they had the character witnesses and the hearsay evidence, of Janet's friends and acquaintances and family who she had confided in. Detective Bradley also testified to the version of events that Raven told him had happened that night. It's another version. He said Raven told him that when he came home and found Janet dead on the floor, he called 911 from his cell phone because they did not own a landline. Clearly different than what he told Adrian, right? He said Raven also told him, get this, that it was Janet who caused the majority of problems in the relationship, and that was because she, quote, had problems and would engage in arguments. Dude, this little fucker, dude, the blatant lies, dude. The blatant projection of this asshole. Raven also told Detective Bradley that once Janet started working on her problems, quote, the marriage got better overnight. He told the investigator that he and Janet were actually not very prone to arguments, and that the last one they had was 3 or 4 weeks before she died. Yeah. Can you believe this fucker? On Monday, May 13th, Vanessa Pond, remember, Raven's second wife, ex-wife rather, testified, and this was the testimony everyone was most curious about. She spoke about, everything we went over in part 1. About Raven's temper, his aggressiveness, specifically how he first showed aggressiveness in the relationship on the soccer field, but that it eventually moved to her. Quote, when he sees weakness, he just comes at you harder and harder. He told me how much he hated me and how much it didn't matter if I died. She recounted an incident that happened the night of her bridal shower. Quote, he backed me into a corner of the bedroom and he was poking me hard in the chest. He told me how much he hated me, how much he didn't care if I died, how much he wanted to hit me. He came over to me and swung his hand back. He stopped right before he hit my face and laughed at me for flinching. And when she was testifying about this, like, yeah, it was very emotional. It was kind of hard to watch. Like, she was very emotional and crying. And she talked about how, like, yeah, this whole incident caused her to be like an hour and a half late to her own bridal shower because she was so upset.
The defendant's aggression on the soccer field, did you ever see that while you were dating, prior to becoming married? Did you ever see that off the soccer field?
Absolutely.
Can you describe that?
The biggest event would have been the evening of my bridal shower. I don't even remember what started the argument.
Did you all argue a lot?
Yeah.
What particularly about this event do you remember?
This particular event, I had gotten out of the shower. The argument had started in the shower and then into the walk-in closet as I was trying to get dressed. He then locked me into the closet and wouldn't let me out. Finally, he let me out of the closet. And Caden had come into the room. We'd had previous conversations with Caden that he had his mommy in heaven and that I would be his mommy to watch over him on earth. And so he came in crying, asking to give mommy a hug because I was crying, and the defendant wouldn't let him in. Finally, he did let him in. Gave Caden a big hug. I told him to go out and to close the door and to take my daughter and to go downstairs and play in the basement.
What happened after that?
He had shoved me up against the wall where I fell to the ground, later trying to convince me that I had tripped. And then he backed me into the corner of the bedroom where he was yelling at me nose to nose and pointing. It sounds stupid and it didn't leave bruising, it just left, it just hurt for a few days. So it sounds dumb, but bruising my chest and yelling at me nose to nose, and I have a heart condition, and so I needed to sit down. So I begged for him to let me sit down on the bed, and for him, when he sees a woman cry or he sees weakness, he feeds on it, and he just goes at you harder and harder. And so I was there on the bed just begging him to stop, that we could finish whatever it was later. So he walked over to the door, calling me horrible names, told me he hated me, and that he didn't care if I died. And then he said that he wanted to hit me, that he wanted to hit me so bad, and that he couldn't get in trouble for it anymore. And I didn't know what that meant. He then came over and swung his hand back and stopped right as he got to my face. And I flinched. He stuck his face in mine and laughed at me and walked out of the room laughing.
What did you do after that?
I had to compose myself and show up about an hour and a half late to my bridal shower.
During her testimony, Vanessa also talked about that mystery woman that Raven had impregnated when he first moved to Utah. And on cross-examination, Dexter, remember that was Raven's other defense attorney, asked Vanessa if she knew that Raven actually wanted to keep the child. Quote, "Did you know he tried to marry the mother, have a life with her?" And Vanessa said that she couldn't recall if Raven ever told her that. The jury also saw those 2 recorded videos that Raven had recorded, the one with the conversation with Detective Soul, and then the one with the knife that was supposedly left behind. Detective Soul, of course, also testified to the conversations he had with Raven and all that. And he asserted that all of the accusations that the defense and Raven were accusing the investigation of, like withholding evidence and, not exploring other options, was just simply not true. On Thursday, May 16th, a crime scene investigator who actually witnessed the exhumation of Janet's body testified, as did Dr. Zwirling about his findings of the contact lenses and all that. And after his testimony about the contacts and how he had found them, several of Janet's family members, including Erica, all testified and were adamant and maintained that Janet always removed her contacts before going to bed. She was meticulous about it. Erica said that her sister's bedtime routine hadn't changed since the last time she saw her sister, which was Thanksgiving 2004. She said, quote, "She was meticulous. Before going to bed, she always took her contacts out, brushed her teeth, and washed her face. She always locked doors." The prosecution also brought forth all the other evidence we've discussed, including about the Huskies, the Abaroa's husky dogs, being out in the back shed. In fact, Lisa Seeley, remember the neighbor who had testified, said that night that Janet was murdered, it was actually unusual because she did not hear the dogs bark. And she always heard the Abaroa's dogs bark. And it was actually unusual that night. She took note of it that she couldn't hear them.
Did you hear the dogs on this night? I did not. I didn't hear any commotion. That's until, the police and the EMS people got there.
Michael Guzman, if you remember, that was the church friend who was I think financially counseling the couple and stuff, and he had seen them the night that Janet was murdered. He testified to everything we went over, how the version of events that Raven told him, and how Raven had told him and everyone at the church that Janet had committed suicide, and that, everyone in the church thought she had committed suicide until, news reports came out. The next day on Friday, the trial was actually suspended when new evidence was uncovered. It had been found in a locked storage cabinet at the Durham Police Department, and it was actually a hard drive from Janet's work computer and a Palm Pilot from the Abaroa's Dodge Durango. And if you remember before the trial, this is some of the evidence that Tyndall was saying that investigators had neglected to collect. Yeah, it had been stashed in this locker and I guess kind of forgotten about. So, due to this bombshell discovery, the trial was suspended until Monday so that both the prosecution and defense could go over all of the evidence on it. On that Monday, May 20th, Tyndall filed another motion to have Judge Hudson declare a mistrial and dismiss the case altogether because of the evidence. And this was due to the information that they found on Janet's work computer on the hard drive. So they found emails that Janet had exchanged with her ex-high school boyfriend, Scott Hall, remember, whom she had broken up with in college to date Raven. And they were emails going back and forth between the two, starting from March 31st, 2005 through April 7th, 2005, 3 weeks before her murder. So in the emails, I guess Janet and Scott talk about secretly meeting up somewhere in Norfolk, Virginia, or maybe even Richmond, Virginia. They talked about Scott's kind of jealousy of Raven, that he was with Janet. And some of the emails are definitely flirtatious. In one, Janet admitted to Scott that she was, quote, still in love with him when she first started dating Raven. In another email dated April 6, 2005, she wrote, quote, "I doubt I could make it to Norfolk. I don't really have a reason to tell Raven that I'm going. I have a friend in Richmond, so it'd be no big deal about me going there." That same day, she sent Scott another email that read, quote, "It is really nice outside. I'm wearing a really cute shirt and skirt with no underwear, and so far, my day sucks." The next day, on April 7th, she wrote another email that said, quote, "Raven knows that we talk and that we have hung out. Last time I saw you, he was out in Utah, coming home the next day. He was convinced I was cheating on him with you that night because I did not get home until 4 a.m. and then I had to pick him up at 6:30 that morning." That same day, in another email, it read, quote, "Okay, I'll admit it. I like hearing from you. In fact, my day is a lot better for those few seconds that it takes me to read your emails." And in Tyndall's motion to dismiss the case, he was using these emails as an excuse and to dismiss the case. And in the motion, Tyndall said, quote, "The emails directly conflict with the dishonest image the state's witnesses presented of Mr. and Mrs. Abaroa's personalities and their relationship." He asserted that these emails actually exonerated his client. Quote, "Because the messages contradict the notion, as presented by the state's witnesses, that Mrs. Abaroa was terrified of Mr. Abaroa and was subservient to him." Yeah, I don't understand how the emails contradict that. There are plenty of people, right, in abusive relationships who, like, reach out. And yeah, of course, like, if she was that afraid of Raven, of course she was going to hide that she was corresponding with her ex-boyfriend, because God knows what Raven would do. Like, I don't understand how her exchanging these emails with Scott, like, proved that she wasn't fearful of Raven at all. That was just silly to me. Tyndall's motion also claimed that the state never disclosed this information in the emails, and that it was completely unknown to the defense until the defense hired their own technical expert. His name was Jason McCullough, or maybe it's McClough, but he had retrieved this information. Judge Hudson denied this defense's motions and continued for the trial to continue. Because the prosecution argued that, like, look, we just now discovered this and we handed everything over as soon as we discovered it. And Judge Hudson believed them and ordered for the trial to continue. So the following day on Tuesday, it was the defense's turn to present their side. And they, of course, primarily focused on the email exchanges between Janet and Scott. They asserted that these emails showed that Janet was a strong, independent woman, and she was not some abused, meek housewife that the prosecution was trying to paint her as. Again, like, I get it, like, they're defense attorneys, so they're trying to make the best argument, but, like, if I'm sitting on that jury, I'd be like, so fucking what? Like, you ever think maybe that was, like, her only outlet, you know? Like, she was trying to find, I don't know, like, comfort in an old relationship and stuff, you know what I mean? Scott was called by the defense to testify. And so, yeah, he testified to the email exchanges, and the defense asked him if he had ever been approached by investigators to provide DNA, anything really, for exclusionary purposes. And he said no, he had not, but he would gladly do so right there and then. The defense, get this, was also trying to paint Scott as the possible intruder who could have murdered Janet. However, Scott was in a completely different state at the time of the murder, and when they got to cross-examine Scott, the prosecution asked Scott, like, where were you on that night? And he said he was in a different state. I can't remember what state he was in, if it was Virginia or Pennsylvania or something, but he was actually laid up at home with a back injury. The defense also called their technical expert who had gone through Janet's hard drive to the stand, and Dexter asked him if he had been handed this hard drive back in 2005, if he could have gleaned even more information from it. Quote, "I would have recommended getting a preservation order for Janet's Yahoo email address and one for the Martin Marietta email she used. I would have been able to review potentially all emails Janet had ever received or sent." He also had examined the CD that Sonia had copied, and I'm not sure why this matters, but he said he could tell that the website that Raven had set up for his family, remember he had set up a website for them to see Caden's, like, little milestones, had actually been updated with 4 pictures of the family the day before Janet's death. And I don't understand, like, okay, what's the relevancy of that? The defense also called the soccer players who played with Raven that night in Morrisville. This included a teammate named Jason Small. He said by the time he arrived at the game, which was supposed to start at 9 p.m., Raven was already there warming up. They called another neighbor of the Abaroas, Leo Farmer, and he had been working in his garden the night Janet was murdered until dusk. And he testified he didn't hear or see anything unusual that night. Again, if I'm sitting on the jury, I'd be like, okay, he said he was in his garden until dusk. Janet was murdered, like, at night, right? Like, what does that have to do with anything? Derek, Raven's brother, testified on his brother's behalf. Again, mainly as a character witness, right? Trying to challenge the picture of Raven that the prosecution had painted with their witnesses. He talked about that time he visited the couple in fall of 2004. Remember, we talked about that in part 1. And he testified about his nephew, saying Caden, quote, "loves his dad. They would always be together and smiling, and Caden seemed to find comfort in his father's arms. They seemed to be doing well." Talking about how Raven, like, raised his son in Utah. Again, like, what's the point? A friend of Raven and Janet's, Misty Foxley, testified for the defense, and she provided an email that Raven had sent to her after Janet's murder. I believe it was after he had moved back to Utah. And it read, quote, "I thought coming to Utah would allow me the ability to run from all my depression, but truthfully and realistically, the pain follows me wherever I go, and I must be strong through it." Again, how does this prove or disprove that Raven killed Janet? You know what I'm saying? Like, you can say lots of things in an email, right? Misty did tell the jury that she was, quote, disappointed when she found out about Raven's infidelities. She said, quote, "They were a close couple who seemed to have a genuine concern and love for each other, a lot of natural affection. But it doesn't surprise me because it's so common. It happens in so many marriages. People do stupid things in their marriages all the time. Good people, and a lot of people don't see it coming." Jennifer Walker testified again. Remember, I said she testified twice for the prosecution and the defense. And this time, when she testified for the defense, she provided an email exchange between her and Janet. And this email exchange had happened after Janet and Raven had reconciled.
And do you recognize that email?
I do.
And is that an email that came from Janet Abaroa to you in sometime in 2004?
It is.
And is that also when you forwarded to Detective Bradley?
Yes.
Now, from the exchange, it seems that maybe Jennifer was insinuating that Raven only got back with Janet because she was pregnant, and Janet wasn't really too happy about that. Remember, both Janet and Jennifer worked at Eurosport with, Raven, so maybe Janet heard it through like the rumor grapevine. But anyway, Janet had wrote to her, quote, "He said that he didn't want to be with you, so I don't appreciate you commenting or thinking that if only I wasn't pregnant with Caden, you could be together. Please leave us alone. He has a lot of problems he is trying to work out, and we don't need you involved stirring things up." Jennifer had written back to her, quote, "I told Raven if he wanted to be with you, then fine. I don't care. I'm not his charity case, and I would be fine without him." The defense also pointed to that unidentified bloody footprint found at the crime scene, and they told the jury that none of Raven's shoes matched that footprint. That all of his shoes had been tested for blood and all that, but that all of his shoes had come back clean and, had been tested for blood and they were clean and all that.
We do know that all of Raven's shoes were tested, including the ones that he was wearing that night, and there was no blood on the bottom of those shoes. There was no blood on the bottom of any of his shoes.
However, on their, would it be like rebuttal, cross-examination, whatever, the prosecution showed the jury a photo of about 5 pairs of Raven's shoes. They told the jury that these shoes right here in the photo had not been tested. And in the photo, you can actually see a bottle of cleaner, 409 cleaner, on the shoe rack with the shoes. And the prosecution said that Raven had meticulously cleaned all pairs of those shoes, which pointed to the premeditation of Janet's murder.
The defense told you they tested all of the defendant's shoes, but none of these were tested. None of them. And what do you see right there? 409. So he had time to plan, he had time to act, he had time to clean up.
Jim and Karen Bolton, Raven's parents, testified again as character witnesses. And kind of like with Derek, mostly their testimony focused on how Raven raised Caden. And at this point in time, during the trial, Caden was about 7 years old. Karen described her grandson as a smart and active little boy who loved his father. He's 7, of course he does. And she told jurors that Caden even made a note for his father, like completely unprompted, and just gave it to her. It read, quote, "I thought of 10 stuff why I love you, because me and you are a family, and mommy too, because you take care of me and look out for me, and because you can tell me what mommy was like."
This is a letter that Caden wrote to his dad just at the most a month ago. And he just, like, out of the blue, I didn't tell him to write it. He just handed it to me and said, "Would you send this to Dad?" And it's, I thought of 10 stuff why I love you.
She said Caden had, given it to her unprompted and asked her to give it to his dad when he saw him. Again, how is this relevant? How is Raven being a father relevant to him being an abusive husband? She told the court about the phone call she had with Janet, how she had advised Janet to leave her son.
Raven and Janet had called me months before, and Raven said, "Mom, I'm really sorry, but Janet wants to talk to you." And so Janet got on the line, and she's like, "Karen, I want to tell you something that your son has done." And I was like, "What?" And she said, "He's been cheating on me." And I was like, I didn't know what to say. And she said, I'm so mad at him, and just calling you because I know you'd understand, and I not sure what to do, and I immediately said, dump him. He's not good enough for you. And I think she was shocked that I said that. But I repeated myself and told her, dump him. And she kind of hesitated and then said, well, I don't want to go there. And she said, I'm really mad right now, but I think, we're going to at least talk, and I'll figure out what I'm going to do, and I don't know. I don't want to tell my family. And I said, you know what, you can come here, come to Utah to think, and I knew she wouldn't do that. I think, I don't know, she just said, okay, we'll work it out. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I think she was just mad, and probably Raven said, you talk to my mom. So I knew.
And how she was, quote, very angry when she found out about Raven's embezzlement. And she also had to state for the record that she had nothing to do with it. Remember, some of those packages that Raven had sent to his home was in her name. So just for the record, she had to state, no, I had no idea, no part in it whatsoever. She said that she was aware that the couple were having financial problems and that Raven had been fired, but she thought they had reworked their finances to live more within their means. Quote, I thought that was good of him to do that, to bring down their bills. She also said that she believed that Raven truly did want to be with Janet after she was pregnant because, quote, he loves kids. She also said Janet probably told her father about Raven going on his 2-year mission in Peru, which of course was not true. Why that was relevant, I don't know. There was some testimony in this trial that I was like, why is this relevant? Jim, Raven's stepfather, pretty much testified the same thing, just kind of talking about Caden, saying that Caden was, quote, is a good speller. He's participating in all kinds of activities at school. He's the lead in a play at school. He's involved in a lot of after-school things like dancing and art classes.
How is Caden doing in school?
Caden's really smart. He is a good speller. We spend lots of time with that. He is participating in all kinds of activities at school. He's a lead in a play at school. He also is involved in a lot of after-school things, like dancing. He also is involved with art classes after school.
How was he doing when he came to your house to live 3 years ago?
Good.
So he was doing well before he got to your home?
Yes.
And with that, on Friday, May 24th, the defense rested their case. On Monday, May 27th, Judge Hudson again denied a defense's motion to dismiss the case or declare a mistrial and told them that they could not bring any such motions forth anymore. He was tired of it. The following Tuesday, May 28th, the prosecution presented their rebuttal arguments, and this included testimony from Scott. He told the jury about the email exchanges he had with Janet, and when the prosecution asked him why he did not initially come forward, as a witness, especially after hearing about Janet's death, Scott admitted, quote, I was married to someone else. It was inappropriate. We were flirting and joking around. We had dated, and when we finally started talking again, it was easy to have that relationship again. Maybe we should not have done that.
Now, did you specifically talk about these emails when you talked to the officer back in 2005?
I don't remember. I don't think so. I don't remember.
And if you don't think you did, why would you have not?
I don't know. I was married and was is it appropriate?
Tell the jury what these emails were between you and Janet.
Flirting, joking around. We had dated, so I think when we finally did start talking again, it was very easy to kind of have that type of relationship again. Clearly is inappropriate and we should not have done that.
And I believe at this point in time, he was no longer with his wife. But yeah, he said that was pretty much why he didn't voluntarily come forward, is because, he was married at the time and he knew that it wouldn't be good. He said that in their exchanges, Janet always talked favorably about Raven, but that he, quote, heard different from that after her death. And he said of that, quote, "All I can assume was she was embarrassed and didn't want me to know her relationship wasn't going well." And the prosecution finished their rebuttal arguments with a recording of that conversation Soule had with Raven behind bars in 2012 about the copy of his hard drive. And finally, on Wednesday, May 29th, final arguments began. And the defense, again, right, really focused on the emails with Scott, the fact that major evidence had been uncovered during the trial, and that the police treated Raven like a suspect from the beginning. Quote, "None of us would have guessed about the power of the unknown information. That's what that hard drive symbolizes. The next thing it symbolizes is the state's willingness to capitalize on information we don't have. I know you will give Raven the presumption of innocence. When you're presumed guilty, everything is suspect." In her closing arguments, Coggins Franks listed all of the evidence that the prosecution had presented, and though she admitted that they couldn't give a, specific exact motive for Raven to kill Janet, she did tell the jurors that the proof of the couple's financial problems at the time of her murder, the forensic evidence they had presented, the testimony of all their character witnesses, and of Raven's actions before and after Janet's murder, all pointed to the fact that he did it. Quote, "If you take just one by itself, it doesn't indicate guilt. But if you take one after the next, after the next, after the next, by the time you're through counting, there's so much there that the state has proved well beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant murdered his wife, Janet Abaroa, on April 26th, 2005. She pointed out how despite their money problems, right, missing rent, having to get financial assistance from the church and whatnot, Raven never missed a payment for either of his or Janet's life insurance policies. She then showed the jury a photograph of the Abaroa's counter of the crime scene and kinda presented what she thought happened that night. And with the photo she showed on the counter, there was sandwich baggies, bread, jelly, and along with a baby monitor. And using all that, she kinda presented to the jury what she theorized happened that night. Quote, "The pantry doors were open. Janet Abaroa was making their lunch for the next day. Her husband had gone upstairs. Raven calls Janet to come upstairs. She steps 2 feet in the office and bam, right there. She never saw it coming." In his closing arguments, Bum brought up those recorded videos that Raven had recorded of himself. And he said that those videos, quote, "might be the best, most honest look at Abaroa you've gotten during the whole trial. He talks about a fight, what he's fighting against. He's not fighting to find the killer of his wife who might still be out there. How does he treat Janet? She's an afterthought." And the case was then presented to the jury for deliberations. So on Thursday, May 30th, the jury made some requests of some evidence to look over again. And this included the recordings and transcripts of Raven's 911 call, crime scene photos, photos of Raven taken at the police station that night, Raven's clothing, a map of the layout of the Abaroa home, video and transcripts of Raven's interviews with police, the phone and bank records of the Abaroas, and those videos that Raven had recorded of himself. At this point in time, the jury had already seen these 3 times. The next day, Friday, May 31st, the jurors requested even more evidence to go over, and this included Janet's day planner that was found and 2 DNA reports. But that same day, on Friday, the jury came to Judge Hudson and announced that after the course of 3 days of 10 hours of deliberations, that they were deadlocked. They could not reach a unanimous verdict. And this was even after Judge Hudson had already delivered an Allen charge to the jury twice. And an Allen charge was just a strongly worded letter from the judge to the jury to continue deliberations until they came to a verdict. However, even after 2 of those, the jury sent a note to Judge Hudson that read, quote, "We have discussed the evidence soberly and from all points of view. No amount of arbitration will alter our decision or lead us to a unanimous decision of guilty or not guilty. We are a hung jury." They were stuck on a vote of 11-1 in favor of guilty. They had started with a 9-3 vote on guilty, and after going over the evidence, 2 of those jurors changed their vote from not guilty to guilty, but one lone holdout juror just would not budge. And so, after 19 days of trial, with 82 witnesses and 565 pieces of evidence presented, Judge Hudson was forced to declare a mistrial. It is said the jurors looked visibly tired, frustrated, upset. After the announcement, Jim, Karen, and the defense attorneys quickly left the courtroom, although Karen looked visibly annoyed, like she nearly rolled her eyes when Coggins Franks announced that the DA would re-prosecute Raven ASAP. Janet's family and friends and the other character witnesses who had testified for the prosecution, they all, openly wept, like visibly upset. It was really sad. It is said even some of the jurors openly wept with them. And on Thursday, June 6th, one of the jurors who was convinced of Raven's guilt did an interview with the paper, and they pretty much outed the lone holdout juror. It was a man, and he accused that lone holdout juror of, quote, reneging on his promise to base his verdict on the circumstantial evidence. So before they broke for deliberations, Judge Hudson had given an order to the jury, and that was to treat all the circumstantial evidence the same as eyewitness testimony and, other direct evidence. Potential jurors, when they were doing jury selection, were asked if they could do this, and one woman admitted that she could not, and so she was dismissed. This juror who was going to the papers and kind of blasting this lone holdout juror was Alfonso Hayes, and he was a retired clinical nurse. And yeah, he was blasting the lone holdout juror and explained the idiot's reasoning, which he claimed, Alfonso was claiming, had nothing to do with Judge Hudson's instructions. Quote, "One is that, this was his logic, he would rather see a guilty man go free than see a not guilty man do time in prison. The second thing is that if the hard drive was found at this late date, what else could have been found?" Alfonso told the paper that Raven's lifestyle and his behavior convinced him of his guilt. Quote, "No one else could have done it. No one else had a motive, and no one had the opportunity." He also explained that Raven's orderly personality also convinced him of his guilt. He explained that when Janet, quote, "was killed and the house was not touched, there was nothing out of place. I think if someone else had come in there, Janet, as athletic as she was, I think she would have put up a struggle, and there was no struggle. There was nothing moved around in the room." Another juror, he was a librarian named Charles Ebert. He also did an interview with the paper, and he agreed pretty much with everything Alfonso said. Quote, "To me, what it hinged on was that there was just no credible way to put another adult in that house on that night." And yet another juror named Alex Cromwell, he spoke with ABC's 2020. He also talked about that lone holdout juror's logic, and talked about how that lone holdout juror was convinced that the 911 call showed genuine shock and stuff from Raven, whereas everyone else thought it was bull. Both Alfonso and Charles told the paper that they were wholly unimpressed with the defense's arguments. And Alfonso said, quote, "Their idea was dependent on sympathy, on showing pictures of how he was a caring father and stuff like that. All this mushy looking stuff, which has nothing to do with him killing the girl. He really didn't have a defense." Charles added to this, quote, "All that work and we didn't really accomplish anything. It's frustrating." And unsurprisingly, the dickhead lone-out juror could not be reached by the press. Richard, Janet's younger brother, said that he was, quote, "not surprised that the jury couldn't come up with a unanimous verdict. However, he said he was, quote, more confident, more optimistic for next time, given the 11-1 vote in favor of guilt. Quote, "I don't think any family member will give up until there is a resolution." Connie, Janet's sister-in-law, added, quote, "We are grateful to the jurors. That was a lot of time to serve, and we are truly appreciative. Everyone in Durham has been wonderful and caring." And she said Janet was, quote, "an incredible auntie, a wonderful mom. She loved her son Caden. She would have done everything to raise him in a way she knew was right. We serve her memory." So on the same Thursday, prosecutors offered Raven a plea deal. It was a plea deal to second-degree murder, and it would have him serve between 19 years and 9 months to 24 years and 6 months behind bars. However, Raven rejected that plea deal, determined to go to trial again. His retrial date was then scheduled for January 13th, 2014. And the prosecution was opting for Judge Hudson to preside over the trial again, since he was already familiar with everything. Tyndall said that he was concerned about pretrial publicity making it difficult to find impartial jurors for a second trial. And he was also worried that the retrial would take a long time. The retrial would end up being delayed till March 2014. So to bolster their case even more, right, investigators went back to Dr. Zwirling, and they asked him to demonstrate, how contact lenses degrade over time. Specifically, how they degrade over time if they're buried with a body. And so to that end, on August 1st, 2013, Dr. Zwirling had conducted an experiment in his own backyard. He was attempting to recreate this scenario using 3 sets of pig eyes. And he put each set of pig eyes in their own separate box. Quote, "I applied the contact lens, I applied a lens cap, which is done at your funeral home. I used the same solutions, even the same linen, and I got these little caskets, these wooden boxes, and I put the pig eyes in them and buried them actually in my backyard. And then, after 6 months, I exhumed the first box and so forth." And the conclusion, he said, quote, "The final analysis showed that the contact lenses did change just like the one we discovered. Apparently, this evidence was crucial in determining a flaw in Raven Abaroa's story." So, armed with this, right, the prosecution was ready to go again. However, a week before the second trial could begin, on Wednesday, March 12th, 2014, Raven accepted another plea deal for the prosecution. It was the third one the prosecution had offered him, and it was a plea deal for voluntary manslaughter, and Raven accepted it via an Alford plea, which, if you remember, is where the defendant admits that there's enough evidence to convict, but they don't actually admit guilt. And this plea deal called for Raven to serve between 7 years and 11 months to 10 years and 1 month. The judge, I forget the judge's name, but it wasn't Judge Hudson, only sentenced Raven to 95 to 123 months in jail, with credit for the 1,500 days Raven had already served behind bars. And what did that mean? That meant that this asshole could be released in as little as 4 fucking years. After being sentenced, Raven, for the first time, spoke to the court, made a public statement, and wait till you hear what this little bitch had to say. I would just like to state that I didn't receive a fair trial the first time. I don't think I'll receive a fair trial to a second time. I don't think it's worth risking the possibility of spending the rest of my life in prison for something I didn't do. I take this plea to ensure that doesn't happen, and that's the only reason. I didn't kill my wife.
Thank you, Your Honor. I wish that I could address some of the things that the Christiansons and Ms. Dowd have said, but I don't think this is the appropriate time or place for that. So I would just like to state that I didn't receive a fair trial the first time. I don't think I'll receive a fair trial the second time. And the fact is, I love my family very much. And I don't think it's worth risking the possibility of spending the rest of my life in prison for something I didn't do. I take this plea to ensure that that doesn't happen. And that's the only reason I did not kill my wife.
He also denied he had ever been abusive, verbally, physical, or otherwise with Vanessa. Janet's family, and Vanessa, audibly gasped when Raven read this statement in court. And in their victim impact statements, they pretty much asked him why he couldn't just divorce Janet, why he had to kill her. Family friend Lavert Dowd, Tim's wife, said in her statement, quote, "Janet, in our experience, was loving and quiet and kind and gentle. All of those things that we want to emulate. Janet loved Raven. She loved Raven. She was willing to overlook his infidelities. She was willing to overlook his embezzlement, his controlling nature. She wanted their marriage to work because she loved him. He threw that away as though it was garbage."
Janet and Raven were like surrogate children to us. We have 4 children, and they were like our older children. We enveloped them in our family as if they were ours. They shared vacations with us. They shared holiday meals with us when they couldn't be with her family. And I remember one of the first meals they had at our house, and they're newlyweds, and they're really cute, and Janet, the sweet, kind person that she is, was at the dinner table, and she was very quiet. She was not an extrovert with us. And I was asking her a question, and Raven answered for her. And at the time I joked and I said, "Raven, you're going to have to learn to let her talk. You know, she has a voice, she can speak." And I was joking, thinking it was just a newlywed thing, and he's the outgoing person and she's not. And it was hard to realize that that's not what it was. It wasn't what it seemed. Janet, in our experience, was, as her siblings and family have said, loving and quiet and kind and gentle, all those things that we want to emulate. And Janet loved Raven. She loved Raven. She was willing to overlook his infidelities. She was willing to overlook his embezzlement, his controlling nature. She wanted their marriage to work because she loved him and she valued marriage. And he threw that away as though it were yesterday's garbage, as though it were nothing, as though it was worth nothing. And us trusting him, my daughter, Raleigh, was 14 or so at the time, my son 16. They loved Raven like an older brother, and Janet. I mean, they loved Janet. They built a snow igloo in our front yard. They had a wonderful time with them. And that trust and that love has been taken from them in their innocence. And I must say, it has been taken from me. I can no longer just look at people and assume that they have a decent heart. I discovered that there is truly evil in this world. And it's around us, and it's a shame. I share the same sentiments that I think Valerie said, that, or Erica, why not just divorce? We would still have Janet with us. Caden would still have Janet with him. He would have that positive influence in his life. There's an emptiness that all of us are going to feel, family especially, but the rest of us that are around that knew Janet and loved Janet will just have to deal with that loss for the rest of our lives. And I echo the fact that although I may have forgiveness in my heart, I worry about the outcome later when he's released.
Val, Janet's father, said in his victim impact statement that the most tragic part of all of this is that Caden would never know his mother, and that Janet wouldn't be able to experience motherhood to its fullest. Quote, Janet missed Caden's first steps, missed out on hearing his first words. She missed out on being called mommy. Janet will never get to enjoy watching her son thrive as he matures.
Janet's murder on April 26, 2005 impacted so many people's lives. Janet is my daughter. She was a sister, an aunt, a niece, a cousin, a granddaughter, a friend, and most importantly, a mother, a role in which she blossomed and flourished. Caden was only 6 months old when Janet was taken from her. Caden did not get to know the love that Janet had for him. Janet and Caden have missed out on so much together in the past 9 years. The first thing that stands out to us all is that the day after her funeral, May 8, 2005, Janet did not get to know the joy of being honored on her very first Mother's Day. Janet missed Caden's first steps, missed out on Caden's first words. She missed out on being called mommy, teaching him to ride a bike or kick a ball. Janet missed out on holding her unborn child, and Caden missed out on having a brother or sister. Janet never got to take Caden to preschool, kindergarten, or watch him play in his first soccer game. Janet would never get to see him graduate from 8th grade or high school. Janet would never get to enjoy watching her son thrive as he matures and he starts his first job or when he learns to drive. Janet would miss out on sending Caden on his church mission or sending him off to college. Janet will not get to see the pride in his eyes when he buys his first home or he marries for all time and eternity in our temple, or the joy on his face when he has a child of his very own. We're heartbroken that Caden will never get to know who his mother really was. Our Janet will always be loved and missed, never forgotten. The following poem embodies what Janet really was as a mother. God made a wonderful mother, a mother who never grows old. He made her smile of the sunshine, and he molded her heart of pure gold. In her eyes he placed bright shining stars, in her cheeks fair roses, you see. God made a wonderful mother, and he gave that dear mother to me. Thank you.
Erica straight up asked Raven why he killed her sister instead of just leaving. Quote, one of the questions I ask myself over and over is, why kill her? Why not just get a divorce? Why not just leave her? Why not just leave her to us? She had so much to live for, and you cut that short. When you took Janet's life, you took a part of me, my family, and all who loved her.
It's hard to express my feelings in just a few minutes that I have. So I will say the most important things to me. Janet was a wonderful person. She was kind, she was loving, and so fun to be around. One of the questions that I ask myself over and over is why kill her? Why not just get a divorce? Why not just leave her? Why not just leave her to us? When you killed her, you took away my sister, my parents' daughter, an aunt, a friend, and most important, a mom to Kaden. She had so much to live for, and you cut that short. When you took Janet's life, you took a part of me, my family, and all who loved her. Any time that you will serve will never be enough for the pain that you have inflicted on my family and all who loved her.
After all their impact statements, Tyndall told the judge that Raven shared a lot of the sentiments of the Christensens, especially Val's, and that he actually missed Janet. Quote, Mr. Abaroa shares a lot of what Mr. Christensen said. He's always stated to us how much he misses Janet and how much he loved her, and he has always maintained his innocence. Get fucked. Val, remember Janet's father, said after all this off the hearing to the press that his family, they weren't really satisfied with the result, but they had decided they just could not handle another trial. And they especially just could not handle the possibility that Raven could get off completely. Quote, we are disappointed that he would not accept responsibility for this horrible act. Not only did he kill Janet, but he knowingly killed his unborn child. No amount of jail time will ever provide justice for Janet or her unborn child. That initial trial was extremely hard on the family and all those that loved Janet. To say it was brutal is an understatement. In that trial, we saw the dark side of the defendant. He was exposed for what he really is, an embezzler, a convicted felon, a sexual predator, and a narcissistic, self-absorbed individual. We would have preferred he be put away for life in a place where he would not be able to hurt anyone ever again. Mark, if you remember, that is Janet's youngest brother, said, quote, Raven still maintains his innocence. He says he still loves Janet. I don't believe that. You don't cheat on someone you love. You don't ruin someone's life that you love. Looking back, I wonder if he ever did really love her, or if that was just him trying to win her over to manipulate her. The world should remember Janet as an amazing person. Somebody who was kind, somebody who was loving, someone who would just show you how to be a better person, someone who can make you laugh, someone that makes you happy. And in a family statement, the Christensens said of the plea agreement, quote, with this plea agreement today, Raven has finally admitted, after almost 9 years, that he did in fact kill our beloved Janet. Not only did he kill Janet, but he knowingly killed his unborn child. No amount of jail time will ever provide justice for Janet or her unborn child. It was also revealed at this point in time that Janet's $500,000 life insurance policy would go to her mother. Vanessa, as you can guess, was not happy with this result at all. She was pretty furious as well. Quote, I was shocked, but more than that, I was shocked at what the plea deal turned out to be. That's not justice at all. It's not justice. And on Christmas Day, December 25th, 2017, Raven was released from prison after only serving 7 years, 10 months, and just over 3 weeks, closer to the minimum of his sentence than the maximum. He reportedly now lives in Utah and is raising Kaden, who is now 20 years old. And it seems like, yeah, him and Kaden just get to live a normal life. According to some Facebook posts from Karen, one that was in February of 2018, Raven apparently took Kaden to his first concert. And in another posted in July of 2019, Raven and Kaden went to a racetrack with, I think, Kaden racing. And Karen captioned the photo with, quote, there's a nice breeze at the racetrack tonight. So glad because it was another hot, hot day here. Kaden and Raven enjoying father-son fun. Mm-hmm. I told you this case would make your blood boil. And finally, Vanessa has some words for any woman who ever encounters Raven Abaroa. Quote, please listen to what's out there, what's available on the internet. Please don't be drawn in and please get away as fast as you can. I was lucky enough to get out. Janet was not. I don't want to see that again. And she did say, though, that the whole experience with Raven was definitely a learning experience for her. Quote, I'm a powerful woman. Now I'm strong. I can do this and I can do it on my own. And that was the blood-boiling, frustrating case of Raven Abaroa. And yeah, he practically got away with it. Yeah. 7 years for first-degree murder. I mean, unbelievable, man. Unbelievable. I truly believe that Raven did it. Just the fact that he lied and had so many different versions of events depending on who he was talking to. He couldn't even keep his lies straight. And he's not even a good liar. That right there is always a huge red flag to me. Of course, I want to know what you guys think. Do you think Raven did it? I think it's pretty clear that he murdered her. And it's really sad that he got away with it. And now he is raised Caden. And I can only imagine the things that he has taught Caden about women, about relationships, and all that. So, yeah, I don't know. And I think another thing that's really frustrating is that there are women out there who will, encounter Raven, and even after looking up everything, will still believe him. No, I'm special. He won't do it, we see this all the time in true crime, right? Where women are attracted to serial killers and awful people. What the fuck? I know it happens with men too, but I feel like you always hear about it with women. So I don't know if it's more prevalent in women or what, but yeah, I hope that lone holdout juror can live with himself when and if Raven maybe not kills someone, but definitely traumatizes another woman, abuses another woman, because once an abuser, always an abuser. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, let me know your thoughts down below. We actually did it. We got our recording through with the microphone on. Yay. I just feel so sorry for Janet's poor family, because that's the other thing. They didn't even get a chance to know Caden. You know what I mean? I have no idea if Caden's in contact with them. What do you think Caden thinks about everything that's out there about his father? Probably not going to believe it. He's had his whole life to be charmed and manipulated by Raven. You know what I mean? And just because Raven is abusive to women doesn't necessarily mean that he'll be abusive to his son. You know what I'm saying? So could also be one of those things. There's a lot of people, right, that are oh, well, that person didn't act that way to me, therefore I don't believe your experience. You know what I'm saying? I don't know, man. It's sad and frustrating. I hate this case. This case is also frustrating because, Janet also looks a lot like one of my old friends, Dana, that I used to work with. And when I first saw her picture, I was like, oh my God, okay, her name's Janet Abaroa, not Dana. So yeah, I think that's another reason why this case kind of really bothered me. She just wanted a happy life. You know what I'm saying? And Raven couldn't even give her that because he's a douchebag loser. Fuck Raven Abaroa, and fuck that lone holdout juror. I do not understand how you could find Raven not guilty just based on everything that, we saw in the trial. And like I said in the beginning, there's that archive that the local WRAL Channel 5 has on the trial and the stories leading up to it. I'll link it down below, where it has all of the video, and I just don't understand how you can see all that testimony, all that evidence, and still be convinced of his innocence, or not even be convinced of his guilt. I don't know. Well, I will leave you guys to it. I hope you have a good rest of your week. Next week will be another crime dip, and then in 2 weeks, we will dive into another case. Until then, take care of yourself out there. Remember, don't be a dick. I know it's super hard, especially nowadays in this shithole country that we call the corporate states of America, but try really hard not to be a dick. Try to leave a little sparkle wherever you go. Alright, y'all, I will see you either next week or in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.